Welcome and good evening. The Governance and Policy Committee meeting of Wednesday, March 29th, 2023 will now come to order. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of the Skook Island First Nations, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewa of Georgina Islands First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. Are there any declarations of interest? There are no declarations of interest at this time. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda as distributed? Thank you, Trustee Edwards. All in favour? All in favour? Okay. The agenda is approved. Can I please have a motion to approve the minutes of the Governance and Policy meeting of February the 1st, 2023? Thank you, Trustee Morton. The motion has been carried and the minutes are approved. Okay. We now have recommended actions. Youth and adult student engagement and success, grades 7 to 12 plus, rescission of policies and regulations. I'll turn that over to Superintendent Stephen Nevels.
Am I live? Oh, sorry about that. Good evening and through you, Chair. The report can be found on pages 4 to 14 of your agenda this evening. From our department, as we reviewed policies and regulations, we noticed that some could be considered for phasing out. And if you turn to page 5, you will see a table that outlines those policies and regulations. The first is the Cooperative Education in Secondary Schools policy. This policy was initiated in 1971 to grow cooperative education programs in all of our schools and is very outdated as all of our secondary schools in DDSB have run cooperative education programs for many years. The second is the Music in Elementary Schools policy and accompanying regulation. These two were initiated in 1974 with the goal that all schools would eventually have access to instrumental music and to grow opportunities for instrumental music across the district. This goal was also met several years ago. The third is the daily physical activity policy and accompanying regulation. Components of both, which were initiated in 2005 when the policy was first introduced by the ministry, are captured in the updated PPM 138. It seems redundant for us to hold a policy saying that we will follow the PPM requirements. Fourth and finally, the materials for personal projects policy and accompanying regulation, also initiated in 1970 and 71, have new language that is reflected in the fees for learning materials and activities at schools directive from the Ministry of Education. The ministry directive now supersedes this historic policy and regulation. Our recommendation is that the Governance and Policy Committee recommend to the Board of Trustees that they rescind the policies and accompanying regulations located in Table 1 on page 5.
Thank you. Are there any questions from trustees? Trustee Morton?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I understand why we are not making instrumental music mandatory anymore, but that saddens me because I highly value instrumental music in elementary school. It's a valuable program, but I can understand that we do have limitations. Thank you.
Student Trustee Cameron?
Thank you, Chair. My question is similar. I just have a question around policies being statements of priorities and our goals, and if this continues to be our goal as a board, why we might rescind the policy. And I don't think that rescinding these policies means that I'm specifically co-op in music. I don't think that means that those are going to go away. Like, we're not, so I'm just curious about that.
So you're correct in that. We're not looking for those to go away. These policies were initially created, so I'm going to use co-op as an example, when co-op really didn't exist, and the board at the time saw that as a priority and felt that we should start implementing that into Durham schools. At this point, co-op programs are active in all of our high schools and have been for quite a while. We see it as a valuable component for sure, and we don't see that going away.
Trustee Morton?
A second question, and this is in regards to the DPA. Was it impossible to have daily physical activity for all of our students?
So the rescinding of the policy doesn't take it out of schools. There's a ministry requirement through the PPM that it still continues. So within our regular school day, we do engage students in that daily physical activity. The ministry has changed the language slightly on it from its initial inception back in 2005, so that it can be spread out throughout the day. It doesn't have to be in one physical chunk of 20 minutes. It could be 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. That gives a lot more flexibility for schools within the school day.
So we are still focusing on the 4 A's, including athletics.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Seeing there's no more questions, the Youth and Adult Student Engagement and Success, Grade 7 to 12 plus, Decision of Policy and Regulation. It is recommended that the Governance and Policy Committee recommend to the Board of Trustees that the policies and regulations included in Appendix A be rescinded. Can I have a mover for this motion? Trustee Edwards, thank you. So the next recommended action is school operations, rescission of policies and regulations. Going backwards, all in favour? Thank you. So the second recommended item is school operations, rescission of policies and regulations, and I'll hand it over to Associate Director Jim Markoski.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Brown, the report begins on page 15 of your package. As Superintendent Neville's mentioned, as part of our ongoing review of all policies, procedures, and regulations, the purpose of the report is to recommend the rescission of selected policies and regulations within this report that fall specifically under school operations. School operations has undertaken a review of policies and regulations that fall under its area of responsibility. And this evening, we bring this report forward for your consideration. We have identified 2 policies with corresponding regulations that we believe should be rescinded. And we have further identified a 3rd standalone policy that we are on the opinion should also be rescinded. I will speak to the 3 of them. The first one is a policy and a regulation on the appointment and transfer of staff in the positions of principal, vice principals, and officers. The policy outlines the conditions of appointment and the administrative transfer process. The corresponding regulation is operational in nature in that it states the process by which interviews are conducted and related forms are processed. These processes are now informed through human resource services functions, and the current language is dictated by a professional services agreement specifying the terms and conditions of employment for principals and vice principals. The policy and regulation are no longer relevant. In relation to the second one, the policy on principals, vice principals, and duties and responsibilities, the policy outlines the roles and responsibilities of school administrators. The Ontario Education Act outlines these duties and responsibilities. School administrators also have terms and conditions of employment set out in their professional services agreement. As a result, the need for this policy is no longer relevant. And finally, in relation to professional activity days, You will note that the policy is quite simple. It simply recognizes the need for professional activity days, and the corresponding regulation is operational in nature in that it provides expectations for the planning of professional activity days. The number and nature of professional activity days is informed through the Ministry of Education, our DDSB strategic priorities, and in Provincial Regulation 304. The policy and regulation are no longer relevant, realizing that this was created back in the 1970s. In the interest of ensuring that all policies and procedures are accurately portrayed and reflect current legislative requirements and negotiated agreements and employment contracts, we respectfully suggest that the Governance Committee recommend to Board to move to rescind the identified policies and regulations. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from trustees? Trustee Edwards.
Thank you. I understand the fully rescinding these policies because they're no longer relevant, but just a question on process, because I know previously when it came to looking for, there was community input by school community councils and so forth, and just when it came to qualities of a principal coming into the school, I'm just wondering if that's still considered part of the process under the human resources.
Thank you. That's an excellent question, Trustee Edwards, and I'm happy to unpack that. So in operations, actually, in the fall, every fall, we'll send a letter out to the SCC chair of each individual school. That information is obtained through our parent engagement department. What we do, there's a letter, I actually have it here with me. Basically, it provides an opportunity for the school to provide input in terms of a criteria for a school leader. There's a Google form that's attached to it. They complete the form, and at which point then we house the information to help inform the administrative transfer process to be responsive to the needs of the school. So that does take place annually. Reminders are also sent out if we don't receive information from the school.
Student Trustee Cameron.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering if I could get an explanation on when we talk about terms and conditions for VPs and principals. I'm not familiar exactly with what that means.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. So, Student Trustee Cameron, when an individual is appointed to the role of a vice principal or principal, there are terms and conditions that are set through their association, the Ontario Principals Council, OPC, with our board. So there's an agreement that's signed, and in those terms and conditions, there's specific clauses that are specified, and their roles and responsibilities are actually captured within that, in addition to information in the Education Act.
Thank you. Trustee Morton.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. You say that this policy is no longer relevant. Can you explain to us exactly how the hiring practices will change?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. So, Trustee Morton, the rescinding of the policy and regulation has no shift in terms of how it is that we promote and transfer Ps and VPs. What we're suggesting here is that the actual information that informs our practices is captured in legislation, agreements, which ultimately informs the work that we're doing and how it is that we engage in that work with our Ontario Principal Council and our human resource functions. So I don't want to, when I say relevant, I think from the perspective of it being written in a policy or regulation, we actually are informed through other legislation that we follow. Does that make sense? Absolutely. So it has no shift in terms of our everyday practices.
Sorry, and through you, Chair, just for trustees who are here in person, as you can tell, your mics are turning on instead of doing the flashy green. Once I see that, I'm adding you to a written speakers list, so if it gets turned off, just know that we still see you, just so you're aware. Thank you.
Trustee Miller.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I just wanted to ask a question regarding the comment around the provision for the schools to get to review and look at the school leadership. You mentioned that there is a form that goes out, so I want to know, I guess, around what time of the year would that be most likely to be presented?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. So Trustee Miller, this year it went out on October the 31st. I would say in general, what we do is we wait for September and mid-October to pass, because that's when usually SCCs are created. The information in terms of who the SCC chair of the school is shared with our parent engagement department, I would say usually by mid-October. So usually in late October or in November, that's when we would actually circulate that information. I will say we aim for full participation. We often will send reminders to make sure that schools do fill out the information, and that takes place through our operations department to collect that.
Okay, so the recommended action is school operations, decision of policies and regulations. It is recommended that the Governance and Policy Committee recommend to the Board of Trustees that the policies and regulations included in Appendix A be rescinded. Can I have a mover for this motion? Trustee Morton? Thank you. This motion is carried. All in favour? This motion is carried. I will get this. So the next recommended item is legal services, rescission of legal opinions, policy and regulation, and will go to General Counsel Patrick Cotter.
Thank you, Chair Brown, and through you. The report can be found at page 25 of the package. There's only one policy and one regulation, which are set out in Appendix A, which is found at page 26 of the package. We are recommending that the legal opinions policy and the legal opinions regulation be rescinded. The policy was first created in 1970 and last reviewed by the board in 2017. In our view, having reviewed the policy and the regulation, it's operational in nature. The policy also suggests that an individual trustee can obtain legal advice, which is a problematic piece of the policy as well. The corresponding regulation was created in 1982 and last reviewed in 2018. We would have the same rationale in terms of it being operational, and the regulation also refers to the broader Public Sector Accountability Act, and we note that legal services are exempt under that legislation, so that's also problematic. But the primary concern with these two documents is the operational nature of them. Of course, I should point out that none of this obviously prevents the director and myself from working with the board in response to a board resolution to seek a legal opinion that, on specific issues that might engage the Board of Trustees. But on the balance, on the whole, these documents we are recommending be rescinded as operational in nature. So subject to any questions you may have, that is the report. Thank you.
Are there any questions from trustees? Trustee Morton.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Council Cotter, I'm looking at the chart on page 26, and you did mention it. So an individual trustee can obtain legal advice which is not in keeping with good governance practices. Does that mean that a trustee would go to our general counsel seeking personal legal advice? Or is there another meeting there that I'm not understanding?
Well, the policy says, thank you for the question, Trustee Morton, and through you, Chair Brown. What the policy says is that the director may, on behalf of the board or a trustee, engage and instruct lawyers. So I think that's the problem. The director should not be retaining counsel on behalf of a trustee. So that should be a board. We could, in response to a board motion, obviously, if the board as a whole wanted a specific legal opinion, then obviously that's a motion the board could pass. But an individual trustee in accordance with good governance. That's a decision for the board, not an individual trustee. So that's a problematic piece of it, although, as I say, the overarching concern is the operational nature of the policy.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. So the motion is legal services, rescission of legal opinion, policy and regulation. It is recommended that the Governance and Policy Committee recommend to the Board of Trustees that the policy and regulation included in Appendix A be rescinded. Can I have a mover for this motion?
I'll move that.
Thank you, Trustee Thompson. I was about to call you Jill. Thank you. All in favour? This motion is carried. Thank you. So the next item is revised consolidated bylaws and board member code of conduct. And it was General Counsel Patrick Cotter and Executive Leave Robert Sejanik.
Thank you, Chair Brown, and through you. We've tracked changes on the consolidated bylaws, and so the track changes that we're recommending are set out commencing at page 33 of your agenda package. And as I say, the changes are tracked, and what I'm proposed to do is we'll just walk through them, and if you have comments or concerns or questions, my recommendation is that you pipe up as we go. Chair Brown, if that's okay, we could maybe be a little bit informal here as we work through this document. But so the first track changes, and thank you, Jillian, for sharing your screen. The first track change you'll see is to section 5.5.8. I'll take you to the amendment in a minute, but the idea here is that when we have a fairly straightforward rescission or amendment to a policy that comes through the Governance and Policy Committee, the committee would then have the discretion to say, hey, we don't need this to go to a board meeting for a notice of motion to then show up a month later at the next board meeting. The committee would then have the discretion under this new language to pass the resolution approving the policy and recommending it to the board, and then also recommending that it go to the next board meeting without a notice of motion. So the idea here is to leave that decision to the committee. So the language says the introduction of a new board policy, rescission of a board policy, or an amendment to an existing board policy shall come before the board on the recommendation of the Governance and Policy Committee. In bringing a matter to the board for consideration, the Governance and Policy Committee shall recommend to the board whether the matter should be considered at that meeting or at the next meeting of the board. In cases of urgency, such a matter may be brought directly to the board without first going to the Governance and Policy Committee, provided that written notice of the proposed policy rescission or amendment is provided to trustees at least 5 days prior to the board meeting. So I think what we've tried to do is simplify the process and consolidate sort of the thinking there into a fairly distilled paragraph. So any questions or concerns on that?
Thank you. Do we have any questions from trustees? Student Trustee Cameron.
Thank you, Chair. I'm curious who decides what a case of urgency is to put a proposed policy change to the board.
Sorry, so I think it would have to be placed on the agenda. So the chair and the director of education, I think, would have to agree with the urgency so that we've placed on the agenda and circulated to trustees 5 days prior. But I take your point. It's not crystal clear. If a trustee wanted to bring a new policy forward, could they provide 5 days written notice of it? without it being on the agenda? I don't think so. If you read the bylaws as a whole, it's a matter that should be on the agenda. If it's not on the agenda, then the trustee would have to move for it to be placed on the agenda, and in that case, then you would have to waive the 5-day notice period, which would require a two-thirds majority vote at the commencement of the meeting.
Okay. I'm also curious why the language of the Governance and Policy Committee shall recommend to the board whether the matter should be considered at that meeting or the next meeting. I'm not, if like we're getting rid of the 1 month notice period or one board meeting notice period, I'm curious why we might then have that still be a possibility or there.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously this is draft language and it's up to the committee how you want to proceed. The thinking here is that in most routine cases, the committee will recommend that it be dealt with at that meeting. But the idea is that the committee would have the, there may be cases where it's complex or lengthy amendment. Maybe there was very few people that attended at the Governance and Policy Committee meeting, so that the committee would then be able to decide whether it would be dealt with at that meeting or at the next meeting. So it was just to build in some flexibility, depending on, I guess, two things: the nature of the amendment or the issue, and secondly, what was the attendance like at the Governance and Policy Committee meeting.
Just further to that, through the chair, the board, if the Governance and Policy Committee decided to move it forward to board, essentially waiving that notice period as a notice of motion and then going to the next month. And if the board then, when they receive that, the board then has the option, right, in debating that proposed amendment to, let's say, a policy or the introduction of a new policy, the board then, right at that time, could even decide if more discussion was needed or more thinking. They could also then just defer consideration, right, to the next meeting. So it doesn't take away any of those rights, but it was something that was raised on multiple occasions around some of the more simple and straightforward proposed changes, whether it be to policies, existing policies, or the rescission of policies. So that's why that came forward that way.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. That's good addition. And it also, what it does then is it cleans up the agenda, so we don't end up with these notice of motion sections. It's all going to be recommended action, and as Rob has said, the board, obviously this is a recommendation, so the board can still choose to defer it to the next meeting.
Thank you. Trustee Edwards?
Yes, I actually have no problem with the first couple of statements, but in case of the urgency, such a matter be brought directly to the board is a bit of a concerning. One of the things that under the Education Act, we are required to get public consultation. And so, I mean, I can understand, especially when it comes to maybe a minor amendment to a policy or amendment or rescinding of a policy, that we wouldn't really necessarily want to go through this whole notice of motion, and a recommendation from this committee going to the next board is not a problem. But I do have a problem, especially when it comes to some major amendments or a brand new policy coming through and going directly to basically an urgency going directly to the board. So I have a real issue with that last statement sort of thing, because I think that we need to do our due diligence in ensuring that we have our public consultation on new policies. And I rarely see, when we talk about policies, something that is really, really urgent at this point in time. So I really don't like that last, really the last sentence. The rest of it don't have a problem. But I really think that because we also need that background information that is required. And just saying the intention of what the motion is or what the policy is not good enough to me. That's not enough information. And to me, it would be due diligence for the board just to push it back to the governance committee when it comes to policy. So that's my comment. I really don't like that last sentence there.
And thanks for the comments, Trustee Edwards. And if I could, Chair Brown, and through you, yeah, I think it's fair to say that that's not really a recommendation that we're making. That language is a carryover from the prior draft. So you know, we're not really making a recommendation on that one way or the other. I will say that when there's a case of true urgency, obviously the board, a 2/3 majority of the board can suspend the provisions requiring it to go to the governance committee anyway. So, you know, I think that's probably sufficient, just the general powers to suspend the rules if there's a really urgent matter. So, I think that could cover. It's not like if we delete that, we have no remedy. If there's an urgent matter, we could still bring it forward on a 2/3 majority to suspend the rule that it go to governance committee.
Trustee Pinello.
Thank you, Chair. Through you. I echo some of Trustee Edwards' sentiments, and I think for me it's how this policy may actually work in practice. So I'll use tonight as an example. Should we, as the committee tonight, decide to recommend to the board at our next meeting under this new or amended policy, whether something is considered or not, I understand that the board can then decide whether to deal with it that evening or push it to the following. But in cases of urgency, I think the language is a little confusing for me because such a matter may be brought directly to the board without going to the Governance and Policy Committee. I would wonder, is that within the same context in terms of, for instance, would the chair of the Governance and Policy Committee be able to forward something, or is this a more general term in that any trustee can table a motion at board without it coming through the committee first, assuming that they meet those 5 days. So that's where I would appreciate just a little bit of clarification.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and through you, Chair Brown. So, and maybe the language, if the committee decides to keep it, maybe the language can be tidied up a little bit, but the intention is that the trustee would have the matter placed on the agenda and would provide written notice of that in advance of the meeting. So it would still have to, the chair would still have to agree that it's urgent and get it on the agenda. So that maybe could be cleared up, but that's the intent. It's not something that would go to governance. It's if there's an urgent matter that needs to go directly to the board and the chair agrees, then it could go straight to board. That's, as I say, that's not something we're recommending. That was a carryover from language in the prior version that the board had adopted. So we've left it in.
Okay, through you, Chair, sorry. So then thank you, Council Cotter, if I were to reword that last sentence for understanding, it would be in cases of urgency, such a matter may be brought directly to the board by any trustee, would be the interpretation of it.
That's correct.
Okay.
I think we would have to, as I read it here and we talk it through, the language "such a matter" is confusing because is that a recommendation from the committee?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we would have to say, in case of an urgency, a proposed new policy amendment or rescission may be brought directly to the Board of Trustees by a trustee, provided it's placed on the agenda, et cetera. And I think with that clarification, that would read much better. But I think we still, Chair Brown, and through you, I think while we're on this clause, given the debate, I think what I would suggest, and I don't know if Trustee Edwards is prepared to move it, but if Trustee Edwards wants to move an amendment to that now, we could get and we'll deal with the sort of passing the whole thing later, but maybe if there's a proposed deletion here from Trustee Edwards, then maybe we deal with that now before we move on.
Trustee Edwards?
Yes, because I still think that this sentence confuses us when we're talking about policy and the Governance and Policy Committees. And I know that when it comes to adding things on later, we've got some better language. So I propose to, in the recommended additions, to delete the sentence, in case of urgency, such a matter may be, to the very end, prior to the board meeting. I'm not going to read the whole thing. That's my motion. Thank you.
I'm assuming we've just amended the motion.
Well, so
No,
trustee Brown.
I'm asking for the amendment. Now you have to have a vote on it as far as,
You would have to have
or
a,
discussion and a vote.
you would have to have a seconder, and just vote on whether, the majority of the committee agrees with that deletion. So that's all we would be voting on right now, and then we'll move on with the rest of the, move on with the rest of the issues. If that fails, then perhaps trustee Pinello, would want to deal with an amendment, cleaning up the language, but I think first we see if it's going to be there. Would be my suggestion, Chair Brown. So have a seconder on that. If it's seconded, then call, see if there's any more comments, and then take the vote on that.
Can I have a seconder? Trustee Miller. So I'm opening the floor for discussion.
So basically, what we're doing for the proposed amendments under section 5.58, everything will stay the same, except we're going to delete the last sentence. In case of urgency, such a matter may be brought directly to the board without first going to the Governance Policy Committee, provided that written notice, et cetera, set right to the end to the board meeting. The other, that's, I'm asking to delete that amendment to that entire sentence. Thank you.
Trustee Pinello?
Thank you. Sorry, I just want to ask if we can, in the Zoom, get the language back up for folks who are joining online, just so that they can see on their screen. Sorry, I know we're all doing a million things at once. Thank you.
Yeah, so that language then, the language in red that's stroked out is the motion that trustee Edwards has moved and trustee Miller has seconded. So you can, I think, call for any further comments on that, Chair Brown, and then take the vote.
Student trustee Cameron.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to say that I think this is sensible, just in terms of clarifying language and using the rules to suspend the rules that we already have, so.
Okay. Trustee Pinello.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I would also agree, and I think it's a point well taken that if we want to amend this language and later add to it, it's much easier to do so once we've had some time to review, process, and what makes the most sense. So, thank you.
Thank you. So we do have a recommendation of the revised consolidated bylaws and board member code of conduct.
So I think, sorry, Chair Brown, if I could just interrupt, I do have many more sections to go through.
Oh,
But I just
apologies.
thought if there was a specific amendment, we could deal with that first. So my suggestion is just call the vote on the amendment and we'll keep going here. So if we, I think just call the vote and all in favor of that amendment, and then I'll just keep moving forward.
Okay.
And then we'll deal with the approval at the very end.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to call a vote on the amendment. All in favor? Okay, that's carried. Councillor
Thank you.
Cotter?
Thank you, and through you, Chair Brown. So the next,
Sorry, Chair, I just have a question on this section still.
Student trustee Cameron, is this regarding the amendment that we've just made, or on the next thing we're about to speak, the next motion we're about to speak on?
It's on the same subject, on 5.58.
Okay, go ahead.
So going forward, once this amended bylaw, or this revised bylaw goes through at this committee, on all of our recommendations to the board, it'll say either we want it to go to the next board meeting or the board meeting after that. That's right?
That's correct. The resolution will say, the committee recommends that the board, adopt the amended policy and that it do so at the next meeting of the board.
Trustee Edwards?
And just a comment, that will happen after this policy, the whole bylaw gets approved, which still is the old process, which has to go at this point in time. Thanks.
Yeah, we're going to have to live with this for a bit. And Jillian, if you could just scroll back up, please, to clause 1.5. No, that's, no. We'll come back to that. We'll come back to that later. Sorry, let's go down. Sorry, 5.13.5. It's on page 56 of the package. So the next suggested revision is sort of a bit of a cleanup of presentations to the standing committee and sort of putting a little bit more particulars around the process and the considerations, because we found that in receiving and processing the requests, it might be helpful for the chair to have a little bit more descriptive language in the bylaw in terms of the considerations. So that's what we're proposing, but happy to answer any questions. I won't. I don't intend to read through it. I'm happy to do so, Chair, if you wish, but I think it's there on the screen for people to read, and happy to answer any questions. And Jillian, you've got, I think there's just a short addition to B there, and then if you could just scroll down a little more so people can read the bottom. There we are. Yeah, C and D.
Are there any questions from trustees? Hearing none? Oh, sorry, Trustee Edwards?
I'm just wondering when it comes to, because I'm trying to read, I was trying to read it and I couldn't seem to find it, and I just probably missed it. Whether, when it comes to a request to do a presentation and the request is denied, is the person actually given a written or a phone call or something to say why it doesn't meet the requirements of the board?
Yes, that's correct, they are.
Okay.
But are we, sorry to jump in, and I know, Rob, you do that all the time, but I think Trustee Edwards' question was a little bit different. Do we have a specific requirement in the bylaw to do that? I don't think so. I'm looking at it now as we speak, but I certainly don't recall that. I know Executive Officer Surjanic does that as a matter of course, but it's not in there right now. Shall I move along? I'm sorry, I can't see the room, so
It's
I don't know
okay.
if there are
So
questions on that, or?
We have one more question, Trustee Pinello?
Thank you, Chair, through you. So this for me just raised a question in my mind. So when we are considering, so with this amendment, it would be that the chair can, or maybe I was reading the one just above it, that the chair can decide, oh, yes, in considering whether to grant approval. So to piggyback a little bit off of Trustee Edwards' question, if a presentation application is made and it's determined that it doesn't align with I guess, point C, the Ontario Human Rights Code, the board's human rights policy and procedures, Indigenous education policy and procedures, or it falls out of our jurisdiction as outlined in B. I'm wondering if there would be value in the chair during standing outlining that, you know, here's the number of applications that were made and some of which felt outside of our purview. And I question that just because I'm unsure how many applications as a new trustee we actually might receive on a regular basis, and that there may be many more community organizations interested in presenting, and it just might not be here is the right position. But I think it's important for transparency that we share how many we're receiving, and also just generally, you know, they didn't fit within this scope or our jurisdiction, and here's why. One, for applicants' sake, so that they know why they were maybe denied or rerouted to a more appropriate place, or if it's in line with Part C's amendment in terms of it's falling outside of the Human Rights Code, our policy, and Indigenous education policy and procedures. I think that would be great for other trustees to see as well. So I'd be glad to, I mean, I'm open to hearing, like, Councillor Cotter, your thoughts first, but otherwise I'd be glad to move an amendment to add that as a sub-point, maybe as E under this section.
Thank you, Trustee Pinello, and through you, Chair Brown. I would defer to Executive Lead Sir Janik on it. He manages the request, so he may have some insight on it. That might be a benefit to the committee.
I think there's two parts to this through you, Chair. In terms of the number of requests that we receive yearly, they tend to be quite few and infrequent. Over the past year, I can think of probably 2 or 3 situations where a request was even made, and one of which I believe was not applicable, or the matter had already been resolved and dealt with, so the group had actually pulled back the request. One where it didn't meet kind of what the requirements were, and it's up to the vice chair's discretion, the chair of standing committee's discretion. So in terms of the numbers, it tends to be quite few and infrequent. In terms of announcing that at a standing committee meeting, I mean, I don't see any reason why the chair of standing wouldn't be able to say, we did receive one request, however, it didn't meet, the requirements of our bylaws, and just to leave it there like that. I don't see any major issue with that, but in either situation, whoever is making that request would be informed that the request either is approved or denied, and then if it was denied, what that reason might be.
Student Trustee Cameron.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's sad how few presentations we get, and I'm not sure why. I know that lots of other boards get lots of presentations. It might be because people don't know what we do, or care enough to come and present. But I think if we want more presentations to come, then I think that we should be informing trustees of when that they do come and potentially they're denied. So I think we should add a section saying that trustees should be informed when an application's denied, something like that. So I could just write out some language.
Trustee Edwards.
Thank you. We're somewhat getting into procedure as far as when something comes forward and so forth. It's just, I was just looking at the accountability when I was bringing this up, and I do understand that Executive Lead Sir Janik does a wonderful job in responding to anybody that comes in, and other staff as well, as when it comes to presentations. And I don't think it should really be part of the bylaw, other than, for transparency's sake. I think that, and as well as for accountability's sake, that somewhere that if just like we do for internally when it comes to requests going forward, is that we somewhere ensure that somebody will respond to them, whether they're going to accept it, because at one point in time, the presenter doesn't necessarily will come into the exact next meeting, because it might be that meeting is too long, and we can say that we can't accommodate you this standing meeting, we can accommodate you in the next standing committee meeting, or it might be more applicable because we're discussing this that we'll discuss in the, June meeting, who knows? So I think that just in there, as far as just that, once the consideration that, and somewhere putting in there that the applicant will be notified as to the status, or something to that effect. That's all I'm asking. And how that is done is procedure, as well as ensuring ourselves being also informed. Thanks.
Student Trustee Cameron.
Thank you, Chair. So I would like to suggest a motion to the board to add section, I guess it would be section 5.13.6, that reads as follows, and I'll read it slow. The chair of Committee of the Whole standing shall inform the board when an application for presentation is denied or deferred to another meeting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trustee Cameron, so are you amending? No, so are you requesting to amend E under 5.13.5? Is it E? Because I thought you said the next number, so is it
So, okay, my idea was to just add a section, just add underneath in a new section, 5.13.6, and then move all the other sections down. So the current 5.13.6 becomes 5.13.7.
Okay,
Yeah, we can certainly clean up the numbering later. And I don't think it's an E, because those are
It'd be F.
considerations for
Yeah.
approval, so I think it is a separate standalone, Jillian. We can clean up the numbering later, but so to be the chair of the Committee of the Whole standing shall inform, I would say shall inform would we say members of the board when an application has been denied. And that's Chair Brown, that's coming as a suggested motion from Student Trustee Cameron. So you would need a motion from a trustee for that amendment, and then a seconder, and then I think we could then move on, if that's carried.
Okay, so I'm looking for a mover for, can't read it from here. I'm looking for a mover for Trustee Cameron's suggestion. Trustee Pinello has moved. Do I need a seconder?
Yes, it should be seconded.
I have Trustee Linton as seconder. So I'm opening the floor for discussion. Trustee Pinello?
Thank you, Chair, through you. I would be in favor of this just because I think it brings a nice balance between Trustee Edwards' point and Executive Lead Surjanic's point, just in terms of a general statement. It becomes part of our minutes, which I think is important to refer back on, so that we can see over time, perhaps we get more applications at a certain time of year or in certain years than others, as well as it keeps other trustees informed of just how much or maybe how little public interaction we get, so that when we're out speaking with our communities, we can encourage people to participate and attend standing and perhaps give a presentation for something that they're working on or that they're passionate about that's relevant. And so I would be in favor of this as a way to sort of meet in the middle and keep folks informed without doing too much.
Thank you. Trustee Edwards.
Yeah, I think at this point in time, it wouldn't be that difficult, because currently, when the item comes up on the agenda, it's usually, there's no presentations received at this time, and in this particular case, there was presentations received, but they were denied, and, so many were there, so I don't think it really would add to the agenda or a comment, so it's already there on the agenda anyways.
Trustee Miller.
Hi, sorry, through you, Chair. Just wanted to follow up with Trustee Edwards' comment. I wasn't clear if you meant that you agree with the current proposed motion, or you're saying that it's already existed in a different way.
Trustee Edwards.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Yes, no, I'm agreeing with the proposed amendment because it's already on the agenda, but then instead of just the statement, there's no presentation, there'd be just a comment saying that we've received, but it was denied, and that was it. So thanks.
Thank you. Oh. Trustee Linton.
I am struggling with this Zoom thing today, fam. So just for clarity, I'm seeing that it will be told when the application is denied, but would we be given the reason that it's been denied? And I know that's a process bit, but I've been on the other side of this where a resident has put something forward and we've been told, and one, we didn't even know that it came forward, but I think it would be important to know why it's denied and if there's any potential for conversation around that decision. For you, the chair, sorry.
Not sure. Executive Lead Robert Sejenik, would you like to answer?
I mean, I don't think the intention of the amendment is to enter into debate over the reason why an application was denied, simply to inform the board when an application was denied, and that may, depending on the chair of standing, include what that reason might be. I can say in terms of us communicating directly with any applicants, that we would be providing that reason, because that will naturally be the next question. If we say it's denied, they're going to ask how come.
Thank you. Student Trustee Cameron.
Might I just suggest to Trustee Linton that if he wants an amendment to the amendment, that he might be able to propose that if he would like the reason to be given for an application being denied.
Trustee Linton, would you like to respond?
Yes, I would like to make that amendment, maybe just add in application has been denied with the rationale to why. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Linton. Can I have a seconder for that motion? Trustee Edwards, could you please clarify the motion?
Okay, so we had the motion, which basically was on the floor. The chair of the Committee of the Whole standing shall inform members of the board when applicants' requests for presentation is denied, and then the amended. I'm suggesting that what Trustee Linton says, with the rationale, be added on the end of that. So that's the amendment. So the words that we're looking at for the amendment to the amendment is with the rationale. Those words added to that sentence.
Oh, may I have a mover for that motion? So we now need to second it. Okay, may I have a seconder for that motion? Trustee Pinello. Trustee Cameron? Oh. Trustee Linton?
No, sorry, I was raising my hand to second that motion.
Oh, thank you. So, all in favour? Sorry. Do we have a discussion on this motion? Trustee Miller.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I just wanted to, I want to ask a question regarding this, how this will be presented. So, based on Trustee Edwards' previous comment that in our agenda, we would already have notice of whether an presentation, there's no presentation or there is, right? So is it that this new amendment, is that going to be a part of the agenda, the reason as to why? That's the clarification that I'm looking for. Thank you.
Yeah, that's the way I would see it, is under the item presentations, that were there, they can say that, normally it said we received no presentations. In this particular case, we received a request for presentation. The presentation was denied because it doesn't meet section whatever D of our bylaws.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Okay, hearing none. General Counsel Cotter, are we going to continue with the report?
Thank you. So,
We have to vote on each
we
one.
move,
Sorry, Council Cotter, apparently we have to vote. On the amendment.
no problem.
Oh, on the amendment to the amendment. All in
Well,
favour?
I think, Chair Brown, I think Trustee Edwards removed the whole thing, as I understood it. So I think you can just call the vote on the whole, on 5.13.6.
So all in favour? Thank you. Councillor Cotter?
Thank you.
Moving
So
on.
the next section is public question period, 5.13.14 and 50. Again, we've added that, we're looking for compliance with the board's commitment to the Human Rights Code, the Human Rights Policy, and the Indigenous Education Policy and Procedure. And we've, just clarified sort of some of that, some of the processes around that, and including the supplementary question to make sure that it's related back to the main question. I think, sorry, Jillian, if you could just scroll down, I don't think there's anything else. No, that's it. So again, just to clean up, primarily to make sure that the presentations and questions are in line with our Human Rights Code and, Human Rights Policy and Indigenous Education Policy. But happy to answer any questions on those sections as we've laid them out.
Are there any questions from trustees? In the
13,
report.
15, and 14.
It's pages 56 and
5,
57
13,
of your
15,
package.
And 14.
No,
Page 56. Trustee Edwards?
I have no problems with the proposed amendments. My only comment is that when it comes to accessibility for, because there's forms, I know people can email the question, but when it comes to presentations and forms, ensuring that we have accessibility to those at this point in time, because fillable forms are not necessarily accessible, so just ensuring that the process ensures that anybody can submit their questions or their presentations in the means that they can be accommodated, that's all.
Student trustee Kiewit.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Just to clarify, so the people who are asking a question are no longer entitled to a supplementary question unless it's pertaining to clarifying that the answer to their initial question. I'm just wondering, like, how we ensure that their supplementary question is like appropriate, because I don't know if before they were asking their supplementary question through the email as well, like when they submit to ask a question. I don't know if they were submitting one question and their supplementary question, or just their one question.
I could speak to this, Chair.
Councillor Cotter to respond, or Robert, sorry.
Yeah, over to Executive Lead, Sir Janet, thank you.
So over time, I would say it's gotten a little bit complicated for some folks who have been submitting questions where through the form multiple questions were submitted, and then my staff would need to follow up with them to ask them which question are they submitting. In the existing bylaws, it is reasonably clear that you may only ask a supplementary question for clarification, which is inherent to what the main question is. However, for some, they've struggled with that. So we've tried to clean this up to make that a little bit more clear. However, another option for the committee could be to just remove the opportunity for a supplementary question, which was one item that we were considering in terms of making the recommendation, but did want to raise that for the committee's decision here, because to your point, there's no guarantee what that supplementary question may be, and if it's in relation to the main question. So if a supplementary question were to be asked, it would be up to the chair to essentially stop that individual from asking that question, which we've seen at times may cause additional issues or tension within the meeting. So I think those are all important points for the committee to consider in terms of the language that we have here, or if the committee would like to make changes to make it even more clear and clean it up, which would just allow one question.
Thank you. And then I'm also wondering how the chair decides whether or not that question is like in relation or not, in terms of clarification of their initial question. Sometimes I'm watching and I'm like, I don't know if that's a fair question to answer or not, you know?
It really would be the chair's discretion, and it's a tough decision to make sometimes based on, some folks may preface a question with multiple sentences or a statement in order to try and make an additional point and not necessarily wish to ask a supplementary question. So that's sometimes what happens, as we've seen in previous meetings. So it is always a challenging situation for anyone who is in the role of chair to be able to manage that, because it is unpredictable.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Morton.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I'm looking at A, and I'm also looking at F, and I think it's a little bit confusing. So if you say each person shall be allowed to ask one question, then that's a statement. But then in F, we say the questioner may ask a second question. So I'm suggesting that we combine A and F, and the wording could be like this. Each person shall be allowed to ask one question and may ask a supplementary question for clarification purpose only.
If I may, Chair Brown, just to provide a little bit more context as to why we've made the decision to split it up. It's because of the confusion when folks were submitting questions and submitting more than one question together and viewing a supplementary question as the ability, which is why we've actually suggested to split it up in that way, just going through the practice to make it a little bit more clear that your supplementary question is only for clarification purposes. And really, if you're asking a supplementary question for clarification, you won't know what that question is until after an answer is provided. So that's the reason why. If you wish to move that, by all means, Trustee Morton, but just wanted to provide more clarification as to why it was split up in terms of operationally what's taken place.
Thank you, and through you. I just find it a little bit confusing when we start by saying each person shall be allowed only one question, because that means we're not providing that supplementary question. You've made that statement, so I just find that a little bit confusing. I would like to move that the wording be changed somewhat.
May I have a seconder to that motion?
Trustee Thompson had her hand up. I don't know if it was in relation to a seconder or for a comment, Chair Brown.
It was a comment. I was thinking, in response to that last comment, could we add something like, following the answer to the first question, a supplementary question for clarification purposes only would be allowed, or something like that? Just to make it more clear.
Trustee Thompson, would you like to amend the amendment?
Yeah, I think what we could do is, if we said, and if I can just jump in here, Trustee Thompson, if we said, and may, comma, following the answer at the meeting, comma, ask a supplementary question for clarification purposes. So I would say, comma, and may, comma, following the answer at the meeting, comma,
Can we have a seconder for that motion, to the amended motion? Thank you, Trustee Edwards.
So, Chair Brown, I think as part of that amendment, that would also mean deleting F, correct?
Correct.
correct, yeah.
Are there any further questions from trustees? Student Trustee Cameron? No? Okay, thank you. So are there any further questions from trustees? Trustee Pinello?
Thank you, Chair, and through you. So my question here would be, and maybe it's strictly procedural, but I'll direct it to Executive Lead Sir Janik. When someone submits their question and they receive this explanation saying, with the amended A, let's assume it passes, and that's what people see. When the chair then welcomes the person asking the question at the meeting, we would update that language of the instruction given to the individual at the meeting saying, you'll ask your one question, should you have, you know, a supplementary pertaining to the original question for clarification. So we would also update that language. We don't need to add that in here, right? Okay.
No, I don't think you would. Pending this change, we would update the section on the website that goes into detail around public question periods, and we'll try and make it as clear as possible in terms of that process, hoping that folks who do go through it are then able to follow it.
Councillor Carter?
I have no further comments, Chair Brown, so I think that's been moved and seconded, so I think that amendment, so I think you can just take the vote on that if there are no other comments, and we can move on.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair Brown, just for clarification for the minutes, did we have a seconder for that? And
Yes.
Who was that, for clarification? Thank you.
Of the amendment. Are we all in favour? Calling for a vote. Thank you. Councillor Carter, would you like to continue?
Thank you, Chair Brown. So we're down to page 58, filling trustee vacancies. As we went through the process for filling few vacancies during the last term, there were a few sections that we realized could use improvement. So that's what's been drafted here is sort of some cleanup of some of the hiccups we realized in the process. So I don't know, Executive Lead Sir Jack took the lead in drafting this particular section, so I'd turn it over to him if he wants to summarize this in a little more detail than I have.
Thank you, Chair Brown. I think the biggest piece with these proposed amendments is when we went through the appointment process to replace some trustees that no longer were trustees. We encountered some difficulties with that process just because the current bylaws are extremely prescriptive in terms of when the meeting must take place to interview candidates. I believe it says on the Monday of a board meeting with interviews taking place, I think, before 4 p.m. Or something along those lines, which was very inflexible for the needs of the board. And also didn't consider the option of virtual meetings at that time as well. So we proposed some amendments here to just streamline that process, which would then, subject to obviously creating a vacancy committee, then being able to decide how that appointment would be filled. First of all, whether it's just an appointment out of previous candidates, or if the requesting submissions from the public in order to be appointed. And that would then, the vacancy committee would then be able to determine when that meeting would take place, and it would take place as a special meeting of the board, so that if there's then quorum at that meeting, all trustees would be able to vote on whoever the successful candidate would be. And if, for example, a trustee had to miss 1 or 2 interviews, they still would be able to vote as part of that, because at the end of that process, trustees are required to vote to confirm that appointment regardless, and I believe that's in the Education Act. So this just cleans it up and simplifies that process. And let's say quorum was not achieved for that special meeting, those interviews would still take place, but then instead of it being a special meeting, it would just be a selection committee, and then they would be making that recommendation to the board, because the board ultimately needs to make that appointment. We also just cleaned up the advertising piece, just specifying for a minimum period of 1 week it shall be advertised. And instead of all the local newspapers, although that's something we would endeavor to do based on the timelines, there are different newspapers that publish on different schedules. So it would be published in all the newspapers, but also on social media as well. And of course, all of this would be posted on the website, although I guess we did not specify that here. And that is generally what the proposed amendments are, really is to streamline that process and make it a bit simple and less cumbersome for the board.
Do we have any questions from trustees? Student trustee Cameron.
Thank you, Chair. I'm curious if student trustees are entitled to sit on the selection committee.
Through you, Chair Brown, I'm happy to jump in on that. We don't have the Education Act in front of me, but as I recall, it specifies that members of the board are the ones that fill the vacancy, and members of the board would not include student trustees, as defined in the Education Act.
Thank you. As well, under these amendments, would the final vote to appoint the trustee be a public one?
yes, it would be at a special board meeting. I would assume because it was a special board meeting that student trustees would be eligible to attend that meeting, but wouldn't be able to join in on the appointment themselves of it. But yes, it would be public, and it should be in public.
Thank you. Trustee Edwards.
Thank you. My question is around the section where you're talking about should there be a large number of candidates and a second day for interviews shall be determined. One of the things that we ensured is that we wanted to ensure that the same trustees were part of both days. And that's not necessarily clear because that's what equitable, you can't have one group assess, one part of the group assess the first candidates and the second group assess the second candidates. So I'm not 100% sure that that is particularly dealt with the, should a quorum of trustees not be presented on the meeting, those presented constitute a quorum of the selection committee. I understand that, but it's got to be the same quorum, the same trustees. So I'm not sure how to word that particularly. In that section, how to deal with it, or adding another sentence in there that's got to be the same members for both days.
Through you, Chair Brown, Trustee Edwards. The amendments to this does not necessarily take into account that it needs to be the same. The amendments that we propose say that it would take place at a special meeting of the board, and ultimately all members of the board would have to, at the end of the day, vote on the applicant. So that one piece is removed. Actually, all trustees, only trustees present are eligible to vote. I think in that scenario, it would really be up to both the chair of the board and the chair of the vacancy committee to whether it be either make a decision or canvass trustees to see who might be available. I think if interviews, if submissions are only 5 minutes, I think it's quite reasonable that probably the board would be able to finish them all in one day, but this was holdover language from the past in terms of deciding a second day. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Student trustee Cameron.
Thanks, Chair. I think it's my understanding that you can't tell a trustee that they can't vote on something because they didn't attend. So the trustees have to be able to vote on the final application. I'm wondering if the vacancy committee could on itself decide that only the people who were there on that day would be able to vote. So to do the recommendation, something like that. Is that?
What I would suggest, if that was the direction of the committee, we may wish to keep previous provisions of the bylaws, as opposed to calling a special board meeting in order to interview candidates and make a decision, which is the updated recommendation to streamline the process. In a very quick scan, although it was a little bit difficult to determine other school boards, we did look at some other municipalities, and some municipalities would call essentially a special meeting of the municipal council in order to consider and vote for applicants.
Council Cotter, I'm assuming, we have trustee Piniella.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I just had a question for section G that was crossed out. A recommendation shall be brought forward to the committee of the whole, closed session to approve the appointment. All trustees are eligible to vote on the recommendation. The person shall be advised by telephone of the board's decision. So that was all striked out. I just, really quickly, if there's clarification on why, and if it was because those pieces were just added elsewhere.
when we had went through the process, we discovered really quickly and too late that provision was quite odd, where essentially the selection committee, as it was called at that time, would then have to bring it forward to the board, but that would have to take place as part of a special meeting of the board in camera to then go and approve the appointment, approve the public recommendation of the selection committee, because that selection committee is voting in public, and then essentially it's saying, take that and then bring that to a closed session of the board to approve the appointment. It was quite cumbersome when we went through that process, and in our view, going through that was unnecessary, given that you had a selection committee that just made that recommendation. So this removes that additional step and complication, and if I remember correctly, there was one or two hiccups in that process as well that we had to take a little bit of extra time and procedural wrangling in order to resolve.
Thank you. Trustee Miller?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I just wanted to comment that I've read through it again, and I find that it seems to support the action of making things a little bit more simple and less cumbersome in terms of sequence and order of events and time. So I'm in favor of this amended action.
Trustee Morton?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. A very minor comment. When we're looking at applications, do we need the words "in writing"? Individuals interested in the position shall be required to submit in writing. Is that necessary? You're submitting an application for this position.
Sorry, which section are you referring to?
I'm looking on page 58, 622, under B.
In that section, that was a holdover from the previous bylaws.
But it's redundant, is it not?
I think it would be important that we did receive in writing an application, and I believe here we've asked for them to do that through the board's website, a form that's made available on there. I'm not sure, I guess you could consider it redundant. I don't think it adds or necessarily takes away in
It's
in my
minor,
view.
I just thought
Yeah.
I'd throw it out there.
I would be, through you, Chair Brown, I would be concerned that we could get, Kathy could get inundated with voicemails, or at least get a couple voicemails saying, I'd like to stand for the position, and then we don't know what to do with those. So while it's probably redundant, I prefer a belt and suspenders approach on that one.
Are there any more questions? Okay, as there is no amendment. Oh, but we have Trustee Edwards.
Just a comment again, because, again, if a form is used and stuff, we're talking about accessibility. And many times, dealing with other websites and so forth, when it comes to fillable forms, they are not accessible. So just ensuring that there's the options that are there and available. Thank you.
Absolutely, and just to clarify around that, my understanding is with our website, we use, it's called a form builder that's part of our website, so not an external one. And that one, to my understanding, from our website, the person in our, whose staff, who's responsible for our websites and our accessibility coordinator, that form specifically is, but it's not to say that other external forms that people use, or even Google form for that way, may not be. So that's our understanding of that. But I think, of course, if somebody were to, not be able to use that, it should still be accepted, absolutely. And that's actually where I would say in writing to the secretary of the board would cover that in some ways.
Thank you. As there are no amendments, I think we should move forward. General Counsel Cotter.
Thank you, Chair Brown, and through you. So the next set of proposed revisions found in Section 9, the election of student trustees. These amendments came forward from the student trustees as a proposal to simplify, I think, the election process and make it more fair. But at your leave, Chair Brown, I would suggest it might be appropriate to have the student trustees provide a summary of the proposed changes.
Student trustee Cameron?
I would be happy to do so. Okay, this might take a little bit of time. Quickly, to review the current process, each year 3 student trustees are elected to the board. One from the west, which includes Pickering and Ajax, one from the east, which includes Whitby and Oshawa, and one from the north, which includes Scugog, Uxbridge, and Brock. In our election process, there are 3 stages. There's, although in the old bylaw, it's listed as 2 stages. So the first stage would be the school elections. So each high school either elects their student trustee candidate school-wide, or the student council votes for the candidate. Then they would move on to the municipal elections. And at the municipal elections, each school gets 10 electors who then vote for the student trustee candidate. Whoever wins the municipal election then moves on to the regional election, which is stage 3, but it's called stage 2 in the bylaws. And at this regional election, each school doesn't get 10 votes. Each municipality now gets 40. And if you might imagine that if different municipalities have different amounts of schools, then different schools are getting different amounts of votes. And that's the current reality in Pickering and Ajax, and I'll get into that. So yeah, our system is quite unique. Sorry, let me just note something. Okay. Okay. Our system is quite unique. And you don't really see a system like this across Ontario. Most are done through a popular election or an election through the Student Senate. And so we've opted to do a popular election of students so that every student from grade 9 to 12 is able to vote for their student trustee. So some faults in our current election system, as I mentioned, different schools have different amount of electors. So in the Ajax Pickering regional election, for example, Pine Ridge will get 20 voters. So will Dumbarton. But in Ajax, they have to split 40 voters between 3 schools. So 3 schools get 13 votes, and they draw for the one extra vote. So one school gets 14, one school gets 13, the other gets 13, and the 2 in Pickering get 20. So, under this current system, Pickering student trustee candidates usually win. The student trustee from Pickering Ajax has been from Pickering for the past at least 3 terms. As well, under the current system, the likelihood of drawing of determining the who wins an election by hat draw is significant. Okay, there's a really good example this year. Both candidates in Pickering and Ajax won by a hat draw. They pulled, I'll give my example. I won my election because my name was drawn out of a hat instead of someone else's name, the woman that I was against. And I'll tell you why that is. Each school, as I said, has 10 electors. Those 10 electors basically just vote for their candidate from their school. And when it ties, they go to a next round. And then it goes to a next round. And after 6 rounds, they draw their name from a hat. And there is not an insignificant chance that this happens because it's happened. Both candidates from Pickering and Ajax were chosen by this method. It's very undemocratic. And also, the way electors are chosen is very odd. It's contained within the bylaw. it's elected by the student council to go then vote for the student council's candidate. So it perpetuates the just voting for your own school's candidate. Okay. Yes, so, under our proposed election system, some features, and then I'll go into details. So, our first thing, So, our first thing would be every student from grade 9 to 12 would be able to elect their student trustee and their voice on the school board. As well, we would make student trustees elected board-wide. Elections would be by ranked ballot and a majoritarian system of election, which we can talk about as I walk through the bylaw. As well, every secondary school will be represented equally, no matter the population size of that school. I can imagine in the north, there are a lot fewer students than in Pickering and Ajax and Whitby and Oshawa, et cetera. Yes, as well, it would remove the previous mentioned faults around elector choice, ties, and the unequal distribution around schools. Okay, so, yeah. Okay, so let me just walk, so I'll just mention this quickly. Attached, separate from the bylaws as a separate motion, is about the Indigenous student trustee. So that is the reason we are lowering the number of student trustees from 3 to 2, because we are introducing the position of student trust, or we would be lowering the number from 3 to 2 and introducing an Indigenous student trustee. So we can get into that later. I would just, if we could, I would just like to run through the amendment quickly. Yes? Okay. So we are keeping the stage 1 candidate nomination the same, where a school can elect their candidate by a popular vote or through the student council. Then that candidate would go to a municipal election that happens in every municipality. Okay, so this would work by a ranked ballot, and every student from grade 9 to 12 would be allowed to vote. Now, the way that we ensure the equality of schools is that each secondary school is allotted 100 points to allocate to their candidate. And these would be allocated proportionally to the percentage of the vote that each candidate receives at each school. Whoever wins the most points shall win the election in the municipal election. And then they would move on to the board-wide election. Now, at the board-wide election, there would be 7 candidates, 1 from each school, assuming that there are candidates from each municipality, because as we might talk about, in the north, there will be no election this year because there's only 1 candidate from Uxbridge Secondary School. So Brock and Port Perry don't have candidates. So in that case, under our proposal, there would only be 5 student trustee candidates at the board-wide election. So at the board-wide election, it would be the same process. Every student from grade 9 to 12 will vote. And each school will again be allotted 100 points to give to their candidates of choice proportionally to the vote. And so something that could be tricky for trustees to understand is our quota system. So the way our quota system works is that the quota is 1 divided by 1 plus the number of student trustees plus 1,000th of a point. Okay, and the reason this is the case is that allows for our majoritarian system of election, where if all the votes were redistributed, no candidate could get more votes than the candidate that is elected. So this is, I can do some math for trustees if they would like, or if they want any more clarification around that. But I'll just explain it quickly. If there is only 1 student trustee position to be elected, the formula would be half plus 1, essentially, which would only allow 1 candidate to be elected. If there's 2 candidates that can be elected, the quota would be 1/3 plus 1. Or 1/1000th in this case. And that would only allow for 2 candidates to be elected, which is what, so our proposal adjusts to the number of student trustees that we're talking about, that we're hoping to be adjusted later in the motion. As well, another feature that's important in this is that if a candidate reaches the quota and no other candidate reaches the quota on the first round, the points over the quota are redistributed to other candidates based on the average vote of the elected candidates' points and votes. So I can discuss that further if trustees have questions. And then after that happens, they would continue eliminating from the bottom of on a ranked ballot, they would keep eliminating whoever has the least amount of points until 2 candidates pass the quota. That's it. Most of the language at the end of the proposal has been co-opted from the past bylaw, section 9.10 through, or 9.10.1 through 9.13.1. That's all I have. It can be complicated, so I would love to ask anyone to ask questions about the system, maybe why a proposal, a section is in there. Anything, I'm happy to answer.
Trustee Morton, do we have any questions from trustees? And Trustee Morton.
Thank you. I have, I think, 3 questions. The first one, why are we stipulating by February 28th as opposed to April the 30th? Why do you need the extra 2 months?
Great question. It's due to change in regulation from the ministry. So I believe this happened in 2021. We are not sure why they did it, but they moved the election, the election date that we have to submit our elected student trustee from the last day of April to the last day of February. I can't speak for the ministry, but it's due to the reaction to the regulation.
Thank you. My second point is we represent 7 municipalities. I want to ensure that all 7 municipalities are adequately represented by student trustees. We have here a trustee representing Whitby. You are elected by the citizens of Whitby, but you are acting on behalf of all citizens of Durham, whether it's Oshawa, whether it's Ajax, or whether it's the North. I believe very firmly that all 7 municipalities need to be represented well. And it bothers me that we do not have an election in the North this year. So I've been a trustee for 13 years. This has never happened before. It worries me that we have a lack of engagement there, and I want to do something about that. We need to work on that. Another question I have is, elect a trustee as student trustee mentor. Should we address that now?
I do not believe so. We can that is to the different section of the bylaw.
Then I will address that later. Thank you.
Trustee Pinillo.
Student trustee Cameron, do you have a comment first?
Yes, I do have a comment. I think that, we are elected, the student trustees, from a region, like Trustee Morton mentioned. But it is our job to represent everyone in the board. So one of the things is that, that we're looking for is to lower the number of 3 to 2. And with our arbitrary regions that we selected however long ago, we can't have 2 student trustees with 3 regions. And I believe that every student trustee is fully capable of representing all the students in the board. And actually that this subdivision of the board into regions does a disservice to the student trustees and the students, and actually makes us worse at doing our job. because we might not be thinking of the students in Whitby or the students in the north. I think another part of this, as Trustee Morton mentioned, is there is no student trustee election in the north, and how unfortunate that is. And there are some serious problems that we need to look to address. With student engagement in the north, and this is a priority for me. In making sure that all of our students across the board are engaged. And I think actually this election process is one of the ways that we can do that, opening it up for every student to run and to vote and be engaged in the process versus 10 or 20 from each school. Every student will have this opportunity. And yeah, I think this is about democracy, and this is about good representation. Because when we have a student trustee election that isn't happening, that is not a good representation. That's not democracy, and that's not what we want. And this will prevent that. While also, I would add, not putting the North at a disadvantage, I don't think, in terms of being elected. Each school is given the same amount of votes for their school. And in fact, the North would have almost the same amount of candidates as the South would as well. The North would have 3, and the South being Pickering, Ajax, Whitby, Oshawa, would have 4. And so there's lots of trade-offs to be had, and I think this is a really good proposal and a really good outcome of what students want to see.
Thank you, Trustee Cameron. We have a few more questions on the floor. So, Trustee Panello.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I do have a couple of questions. So, in terms of, I assume that your formula does account for the fact that throughout the region, we have schools with different amounts of students. So some schools would have, let's say, 600 students who can vote, and some maybe only 400. So the weighting would adjust for that, so that schools that are smaller and therefore don't have as many students would still have their votes count proportionally to that of other schools who might then be able to push through their candidate. I assume that this accounts for that, because that seemed to be the problem that you were illustrating that was already happening regionally when things were split up into like divisions. Yes?
Absolutely.
Amazing. Okay, so in terms of the Indigenous trustee, my question being that in instances where we are not seeing high numbers of students necessarily running for the position of student trustee, especially in the north, it sounds like, there's always the risk that you don't get a high turnout of any students, let alone Indigenous students who may or may not see the value in this role. So with that said, and I'm not sure of the process for this and whether it's something that we locally can change, but would it be beneficial to maintain 3 trustees and instead of removing 1 seat to add an additional? And I'm not sure if that's even possible, but my thoughts would be that you have your 3 trustees to represent the north, east, west, and you have an Indigenous trustee who, chosen through the process that is self-determined, would be in addition to that, so a 4th student trustee. My concern would be that...
Sorry, Trustee Panello?
Oh, yes.
We're actually going to discuss that in the next agenda item.
Oh, amazing.
Thank you. So could we stick to this bylaw currently, because that's the next agenda item.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I heard it mentioned and my brain went there.
It's okay.
So my questions then for this one was just really about the weighting of it and how that would be amended, and then the number of students that run, and it sounds like the student trustees believe that this would amend or would help encourage more folks running. So I will save the rest of my question till the next section.
Trustee Linton.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Brown. Yeah, I think my question was very similar to Trustee Paniello, but I was just hoping I could get some clarity as to a point that Trustee Morton made and then student trustee Cameron commented on, which was why the challenge of having a student trustee from each, so from Pickering, Ajax, Whitby, Oshawa, and so forth. I know you gave me that. I just need a bit more clarity of the challenge there, unless it's going to be covered in the next section as well.
Thank you. So one of the things with engagement in the North is there, I would say, disconnected from the board. Senators, we don't have any senators from most northern schools. But one of the things I will say about representation is that under this process, student trustees can be elected from across the board, wherever, in whatever municipality. And I fully believe that students will elect the person and the people that they think will best represent them. And we shouldn't be limiting students on who they think should be their representatives on the board, because that's up to them to make that decision. And I absolutely believe that they will make the right one.
Thank you, Trustee Cameron. Are there any more questions? Trustee Edwards.
Thank you. And I can see the benefit, especially when we're having all students actually go through and being able to vote. I still a little bit concerned around looking at this and having two trustees, student trustees being elected from Pickering. That's a possibility in that when you're looking at, as far as that's concerned, as well as not necessarily addressing, because again, you're looking at each of the schools to do those elections for the individual schools to get that candidate, and that just didn't happen in the North. So I'm still not sure, unless that happens at the very first stage where those candidates come forward, then I'm not sure how that is. And just for clarification, under the Education Act, we are allowed a maximum of 3 trustees, so that's what we are confined to, is a maximum of 3 trustees, student trustees. So that's where the student trustees are going for that point. So I'm a little concerned still how it's going to address that. Love the fact that everybody can vote, but still concerned that we might end up having 2 trustees representing basically and also representing the most populated, even though I know there's the weighting in there, just concerned, because right now you don't have people from the North coming down from Senate, so if they're not doing it at the local school, we're not going to get those candidates, and I don't see that this really does address that.
Student Trustee Cameron.
Thank you. I'll try to, I think I got most of what you said written down. So one of the things I would just like to address is that only 2 student trustees will not come from the same municipality under this proposal. That they would be eliminated through the second stage, which is the municipal stage. So that will not happen. It is possible for 2 student trustees, one to be elected from Pickering, one to be elected from Ajax. It's possible for them to be elected from Whitby and one from Oshawa. It's possible that they be elected from Uxbridge and one from Scugog. It's possible that one gets elected in Ajax, one gets elected in Brock. So again, I think it comes back to letting students choose their voice on the school board. And leaving it up to them, because they will make the right choice. And I don't, and just on the weighted of the schools, the only thing that would affect the weight, or how much each municipality has influence on the election, is the number of schools that they have, which is true. But don't think, and so we have to balance, right? So I don't think that we can just, I don't think it's right for just to say each student gets its own vote. And so we're making every school have the same amount of votes. But also we have to balance that. The North has more candidates versus one school and one municipality having the same amount or different amount of electors versus the number of candidates also that each region has, because Oshawa has 5 schools but only 1 candidate. Uxbridge has 1 school and 1 candidate. So we have to balance all of the different aspects of an election process, and this is what we think is the best one, as well. On just the lack of participation in the North. We can't force anyone to run to be student trustee. We reached out to Brock and Port Perry this year, and they said, yeah, we have no one. And that, I think that is a failure on our part as a board. It is tragic, and it's a failure. But keeping the status quo is not going to help the problem. The problem is that one of the contributing factors is that Brock and in the North, they think I don't have a chance. And the undemocratic election that we see in the North is perpetuating the lack of engagement in the North as well. So there's a lot of concerns with engagement, and we need to be very intentional with how we start to engage them more. And this is a really good first start. This is a really good plan to get students involved. Every student from grade 9 to 12 can see their vote represented on the school board to start to engage students. And we do need to be addressing student engagement outside of this proposal out of this committee today.
Thank you, Student Trustee Cameron. Trustee Pineno?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, perhaps I'm missing it, but I wanted to ask if within this amendment, the method for the election and the actual voting is encased, if that's specified, because I know there was issues around in-person versus virtual versus hybrid this year. So I think in the interest of consistency moving forward, if there's language or if that needs to be added now.
Yeah. So there isn't language about whether it should be in person or online. The language that we include does involve rotating the location of the elections around schools to allow staff to freely determine how they want to make the student trustee election process. So it could be virtual. One idea that I see is that they could have each candidate do a 2.5 minute or 2 minute speech at a school. And then they record that video and they post it online, and then you vote virtually. So the speech can happen in person, and students from that school or other schools can come in. But the voting will happen online. And that is how it has to be if we want all of our students to be voting, which I think is essential in this process in understanding, just the democratic values and what we want to see out of our student trustee elections. That to allow all the students to vote, it needs to be online, but we can incorporate in-person features and person-to-person communication, even if the voting doesn't happen in person.
Trustee Linton?
Yeah, thank you. And for you, Trustee Brown, just one response and comment just kind of had me thinking, and it may be something for us to take up another time, but maybe for you, Trustee Brown, and to Council Carter, maybe there's a conversation at a later time and date to discuss challenging the Education Act, especially in terms of 2 to 3 students at max, given some of the necessary changes. And I'm going to quote student trustee Cameron: keeping the status quo is not going to fix the problem. So keeping the status quo of maximum of 3 student trustees at a time where a lot of what we do impacts our students, I don't think is the right way to address that problem. So maybe that's for another time, and maybe Council Carter can guide us on that at a later time and date. But I think it's something for us to consider as a board. Thank you.
If I may, I have some history on the role of student trustee that I might be able to share.
Okay, we do have quite a large agenda, so.
Yes, okay. So before 2006, it was up to the board to decide how many student trustees they wanted on the board. Unfortunately, we are restricted under Regulation 7/07. So I would say that we could write a letter advocating for more student trustees, for a 4th one, to be allowed, a 4th one. But I don't think that this is the moment for that.
Thank you, Trustee Cameron.
Did you say more? Okay. Through you. I cannot support limiting trustees to 2. I definitely feel that we need to have 3. And perhaps somebody could answer this question for me. Our board, because of our population, is limited to, and it was always 11 trustees. But this year we were able to add an additional trustee, and we are glad that she's in attendance, an Indigenous trustee. Would that
Trustee
not be
Morton?
possible? Could we not
Trustee
say,
Morton,
let's...
I would like to just remind you that that is the next agenda items. Can we focus on this bylaw?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this is just, the section 9 we're dealing with is just a neutral election process that would apply regardless of the number. The way that it's drafted, the way the formula is set out, this election process will apply regardless of the number, which is, as Chair Brown says, separate agenda item.
Yes, so under what we're talking about right now, the number of student trustees will stay at 3. Yes.
Thank you, Student Trustee Cameron. Do we have any more questions? Council Carter?
Thank you. And so I believe, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's it for the suggested changes in that document. I just want to, Jillian, if you could continue to share, please, and go back to section 1.5. In light of the discussion we had around 5.5.8, I'd like to propose an additional change to the bylaws, section 1.5. So back to the beginning of the document, please. That's first page, I think. So we have a process laid out in section 1.5 to amend the bylaws that sort of mirrors the cumbersome process we had for policy. So given the discussion we had regarding 5.5.8, I'm going to suggest or recommend to the board at least that, Jillian, if you could delete everything after the word voting, the second line. So just put a period there and then add the following language, new sentence. A proposed amendment should come to the board in the same manner as a policy amendment under section 5.5.8. So that way it would still go to the committee, and the committee could then recommend it straight to board, or could recommend it go board to board. So I'm suggesting that any amendments to the bylaws would follow the same process laid out in 5.5.8. So unless there's any questions or concerns with that, and I think Chair Brown, we might be in a position to to have a motion to move to amend the bylaws in accordance with the track changes laid out in the draft document.
Thank you, Councillor Coulter.
But the code is an appendix to it, so I don't know if you want to just move the amendment to the bylaw and then we'll deal with the code separate. There's a paragraph to the code. I think that probably makes sense to split it, to do this, and then we'll do the code.
Oh, I believe I have a motion,
Okay?
I think. So, the revised consolidated bylaws and board member code of conduct. It is the recommended.
Sorry, Chair. Two things. I think we should vote on that amendment first, and I also have additional amendments to make.
I'm going to read the amendment as amended and amended again. I don't believe that we need a vote on the amended report. Am I correct, Patrick? And I can just
No, I think you
move-
can just call, we haven't done the code
can-
yet, so you
yeah.
could delete that,
I
you would
can
delete
call
that
the
from the,
amendment.
you would delete that from your motion, from the suggested motion. So it would just be to, that the committee recommend that the board adopt the revised consolidated bylaw in accordance with the track changes is set out in the document reviewed tonight.
Sorry, before we get to that, I have some more amendments to make to suggest to the bylaws. So
for respectful of time, I think as we already have another information item that is going to need discussion, I'm not sure whether or not it's up to you. I mean, I don't believe both of them will be discussed tonight.
I believe that I have two that I really want to get done, and I think that we can do them quickly.
Okay? Student trustee Cameron.
Okay. So the first one that I want to do, it's if we could move to section 3.1.1. I would like to add a point E that reads as follows: elect a trustee as student trustee mentor. E, so it would go like in the middle.
Can we have a trustee to move that motion as presented? It's here on the screen. Trustee Cameron, can we have some more clarification around that statement?
Yeah, I was having a conversation about empowering student trustees, and I'll be super quick, about empowering student trustees. And one of the things that we think is really important, and we used to have on this board, is a student trustee mentor, which is a trustee that is essentially the liaison between the student trustees and the trustees, making sure that they have all the up-to-date information, making sure that if they have a motion they want to come to the board, that they can, that this person would move it and help them write a motion and things like this. And this is really important for empowering student trustees and student voice.
Okay, thank you. So may I have a trustee to move that motion for discussion? Trustee Pinello? Do we have any questions from trustees? Trustee Mawson?
Thank you. When we talk about a student trustee mentor, I would like to recall, so those of us who have experience on the board, we remember a few years ago where a senior staff member was responsible for leadership on the board. That was leadership with our staff and leadership with our student trustees. That was a very, very successful way of working that mentorship. And I have asked Associate Director Jim Markowski about the possibility of going back to that form of leadership. Apparently, that was provided by the ministry. Hopefully, we could have the financial wherewithal to do that again. I think that that position was very valuable, and I would like to see the leadership come from senior admin.
Trustee Morton, are you amending Student Trustee Cameron's motion? Are you amending the motion, or is that a comment?
It's a comment. I would like to hear other opinions on that.
Trustee Linton?
Yeah, I guess my question was just, I think Student Trustee Cameron mentioned that this was something that happened in the past. Just wanted to understand what the process for identifying said trustee mentor was.
I'm not exactly sure.
I
but
think I'm going to
Okay,
refer
yeah.
that to Director Markowski.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I just want to touch on a couple of pieces that have been discussed. I know Trustee Morton had outlined, we had previously had a position in terms of a leadership development position. And within that position, the individual that was seconded actually worked directly with the Student Senate and student trustees and served many of those roles in terms of mentoring and coaching and preparation for some of the discussions that obviously and practices that student trustees and senators would engage in. In relation to the actual role of a mentor, I think where I hesitate to comment is that currently, as it stands, we do have a member of our senior team, Superintendent Davis, who does work directly with the student trustees. I would hesitate saying more without having a discussion with her, Chair Brown, knowing that there might likely already be mentoring structures in place to support both student trustees and senators.
Thank you. Trustee Miller.
Thank you, Chair. My question was answered. Thank you.
Trustee Pinello.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I think what I'm trying to clarify for myself is my understanding of this role being a little bit more of the liaison with staff, offering the mentorship piece for students. There's a degree of removal in that sense where they can ask different questions than they would ask a sitting trustee. But I also see the value in a role like this in the sense of if you, as a student trustee, have the intention to move things or it's your first time navigating, it makes more sense to have someone who, once you are prepared and perhaps in conjunction with that staff member and with your fellow student trustees, to put something forward, to have someone who would be willing to move it on your behalf as opposed to being left up to chance. For example, what we've just gone over tonight, if nobody had moved to even consider these amendments, we wouldn't have learned as much as we did about the student trustee election process, right? So I'm just wondering if, in the interest of removing barriers for student participation, if both working together, both a staff mentor and a trustee liaison in that sense would be complementary and would be within the realm, but would offer some of the balance that was seen when a staff member, had this responsibility in part. Those are my thoughts.
Would you like me to comment?
Trustee Cameron.
Just quickly. This, I think, is essential to our role, and we are worse off without this liaison to the board. And frankly, we are not supported enough by staff. We do not get answers to emails. So this is really essential to make sure that we are as effective at doing our job as possible.
Thank you, Student Trustee Cameron. So at the moment, we still have a motion on the floor from Student Trustee Cameron. Can we have a trustee move that motion? Did you move it? With no amendments, just double checking. Are we making an amendment, Trustee Morton, to the original motion?
I'm not going to put forward that motion, but I want it to be a consideration.
Okay, thank you. So we have trustee Pinello has moved that motion. Do we have any questions? Okay. The next, sorry, student trustee Cameron, you have another one? No, it's got more. Oh, so, sorry, all in favour of this motion? Okay. What's online? Can I ask for anyone that is opposed? Does anyone oppose? Okay. As we have not met quorum, the motion has failed.
Sorry, Chair, I think that means that the meeting is suspended if we don't meet quorum.
Sorry, I don't have a good view of the whole room.
The motion is,
You didn't have a majority supporting the amendment?
apologies, sorry Patrick, apparently, sorry, apologies, I'm still learning.
No, that's okay. I'm
We
sorry I'm
didn't-
not in person to
Yeah.
help guide, but
We didn't have enough votes,
the
not quorum, apologies,
the
Ms.
motion
Wynn,
didn't, there was not enough votes to carry the motion.
to
Is that
carry the
correct?
motion, thank you.
Okay, that's fine. So then Jillian, if you would delete that then, so that when we bring the motion, delete that E from the draft, so that when we move the motion, we don't have that included.
Moving on, we have another section of the bylaw that student trustee Karen would like us to look at.
Indeed, and I would navigate trustees to section 2.4.10. And I would just like to delete a small section of section F. Delete with each sharing duties as chair. And I would just like to provide some context around this. This is also about empowering student voice. And as much as you might not think it is, as we are chairing, student trustees should be accountable to Senate. And so one thing we're looking at is making a Senate guide itself and not have Senate be the space for student trustees to have all their pet projects. And so we think that there should be an outside elected senator to run Senate for senators and students, and so to hold student trustees to account to students. So this is actually one of the things that we want to do to actually empower student trustees. And student trustees would still be responsible for organizing Senate under clause, it actually says, under clause F. Under clause F, it says, ensure student Senate is organized. We just wouldn't be chairing it because we think there's a better way to do it.
Thank you, student trustee Cameron. Can we get a trustee on the floor to move that motion?
I'm just, in order, taking into consideration your comments, student trustee Cameron, I'm looking at section F and I'm thinking that maybe we just eliminate the words with each chair duties of chairs. So we still want Senate to organize their term. So, what I'm suggesting as the motion going forward is ensure that changing F, so ensuring that student Senate is organized for their term, period, with no each sharing the duties of the chair.
That was what I proposed.
Okay, thank you. So that's the amendment. That the amendment is to change clause 5 to eliminate the words with each sharing duties as chair.
Indeed.
That's the motion.
Can I get a seconder, please? Trustee Pinello. Thank you. I'll open the floor for discussion or questions. Can't see anyone. So I'm going to call the vote.
Oh, no, sorry, just a question.
Yeah, Trustee Linton.
Sorry, for you, Trustee Brown, just to understand the striking out, does that mean there is no chair of the Student Senate?
Correct.
No, I think that, sorry, through you, Chair Brown, I think all it means is that the student trustees would not share the chairing of that. The Student Senate would still have a chair, but it would not, no requirement that it be a student trustee.
Do you have a follow-up, Trustee Linton? I see your hand up.
Yeah, I guess I'm not fully understanding that, so maybe just, so it could be chaired by somebody who's not a student trustee?
Yeah, just one of the other senators. I think what Student Trustee Cameron was saying was they want to share the, democratize it a little bit and let the other student senators chair it.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to call the vote. All in favour? This motion is carried. And, Trustee Morton?
Thank you. I would like to draw your attention to organizational meeting. So it's on page 38. It's 3.1.1. And I'm looking at A, we elect the chair and the vice chair of the board. And then I look at D, and it says we elect the chair and the vice chair of the committee of the whole standing. I think we need to be very clear that the vice chair of the board is the chair of standing. And it is not clear there in 3.11, and it could be more clear in 4.2.5.
Sorry, do you have a suggested motion, Trustee Morton?
I'm sorry?
Do you have a suggestion or
I would like
direction?
to hear from Council Cotter.
Okay, thank you. Councillor
Yeah,
Cotter?
thank you, and through you, Chair Brown. So I think we could certainly clean up 3.1.1. We could say, here's a suggestion, so in D, we say elect the vice chair of the committee of the whole standing, open bracket. Then we'll just say that the vice chair of the board is the chair of standing.
Correct. I think we need to be very clear on that.
So we just delete that, let the vice chair of the committee hold standing, then at the end, the end of there, just before that, open bracket, the vice chair of the board is the chair of the committee of the whole standing.
Can I get a motion to approve that amendment? No, it'll be moved because it's been amended, so somebody has to move and second. Or just move. Am I correct, Patrick?
Do we need?
Yeah, I think what we were
there's a
trying to do was to, other than what we had put forward, if there was any additional stuff, we were trying to make sure that everybody was comfortable. So I think we were trying to, with these additions, we were trying to move and second and get a quick vote on each of them as we go. So I
I'm going
agree.
to call for a mover for the amendment of section 3.11.
I will move that.
Thank you, Trustee Thompson. Trustee Pinello?
Thank you, Chair. Am I able to just amend the amendment, Patrick? I think it might make sense
Yeah, no,
to
for
say.
sure. I mean, we're in committee, so I think we should try to be a bit flexible here as we work through this. And not get too formal, so if there's some suggestions.
Yeah, so maybe if we say in Part D, elect the vice chair of the committee of the whole standing and appoint the vice chair of the board as the chair of the committee of the whole standing. Just so that it's,
I like that, I like that.
yeah. And I would move that
So
amendment.
I think,
Trustee
I think,
Pinello,
just,
sorry, General Counsel Casa, second. Can you please repeat that for the minutes?
Sorry. So Jillian, the word that would change would be after committee of the whole standing, it would be and appoint the vice chair of the board as, instead of is, the chair of the committee of the whole standing. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Cotter.
yeah, no, that's good. I was just gonna help Jillian with that, so it's good.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Chair Brown,
Executive leave. Sir
can I
Janet?
confuse things more and offer a different suggestion that might be a bit cleaner? Like, I'm having trouble, maybe it's nothing. One other alternative could be under A, after vice chair of the board, put in brackets, who serves as chair of the committee of the whole standing. I'm not sure which one's cleaner now, thinking about it, but we're just kind of going through it in real time. I would probably put those brackets right after vice chair. That's another option. I don't know if that's cleaner or not, though, or if I'm complicating it, to be honest.
I don't have a strong
Yeah,
preference
maybe
either way.
it's
I think
fine.
They're both adequate,
Okay.
but defer to the, I mean, Trustee Pinello was the mover, so.
Yes. Yes, you can.
Thanks, Chair, through you. Yeah, I think unless those brackets in A specified vice chair, I think that's where it gets confusing, just because it could be interpreted as either vice chair or chair and or both. So I think if we just want to leave it in D, that might be easier. I'm open to other thoughts, but that's just it's my tired brain.
Yeah, okay, I think they're both good. So I think the motion is D is fine, it works. And then, so I think you had so Trustee Pinello moved it. I can't recall, Chair Brown, if that was seconded or not yet.
Okay, I'm calling for a seconder for the motion presented. Thank you, Trustee Morton. All in favour? Thank you, that motion is carried. Trustee Cameron, Student Trustee Cameron, I understand that you had one more.
That is correct. It also involves section 2.4.10, and it would include, and it would be to add, section E, communicate and forward all resolutions passed and recommended by the Student Senate to the board. So, this is similar to, I would say it's just added to student trustee report. It's kind of just another thing to make sure that student trustees are communicating to the board. That is of importance. That Senate, if they do get something, if they do pass something, that trustees hear about it.
May I have a motion from a trustee to move this motion? Trustee Pinello. Sorry. Are there any questions from trustees regarding this motion? Hearing none. All in favour? Thank you. So that motion was carried, and Trustee Morton.
I have a question regarding 4.5 on page 42, advisory committees. There shall be an equity and diversity advisory committee. We have had that in the past, but it's my understanding that that committee has been renamed. Could somebody clarify that, please?
I'm happy to jump in, or Associate Director Markowski may wish to comment on it. I mean, I think, in fairness, Trustee Morton, that a report I think is coming forward on those issues, and I know that Associate Director Markowski is working with the director on it. So I just don't know whether we're geared up to provide a fulsome answer on that right now, but maybe I could turn it over to Associate Director Markowski.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. So, Trustee Morton, I just wanted clarification. Is it specifically the name of the committee that you're questioning? My understanding right now is that we're calling it the Equity Advisory Committee. We are engaging in a process. I know Director Williams-Taylor had shared a brief update with trustees in relation to that. That being said, I think as we work through the process, we could come back to trustees and finalize what the proper name will be.
Okay, thank you. So I think at this point, it's time to look at the recommendation as a whole.
Chair Brown, I think if we do look at the recommendation, then it would be just for the bylaws and not the code.
Okay.
Or we can go to the code first and then move it all. I'm in your hands in terms of how you want to proceed.
Okay, so just to clarify, just the revised consolidated bylaws. And
Correct.
we
And
are,
then we'll move the code separate once we get to it. Correct.
okay, thank you. So the revised consolidated bylaw, it is recommended that the Governance and Policy Committee move the proposed amendments to the Board of Trustees for consideration with track changes. May I have a mover? Trustee Pinello, may I have a seconder? Trustee Morton? Thank you. This motion is carried. All in favour? This motion is carried. Okay, that's tired brain here. Okay, so we now have another recommendation, which is revised. Is it the Consolidated Board Member Code of Conduct?
Well, it's not called consolidated.
It's not consolidated,
but
okay.
Well, the code is an appendix to the bylaws, so it's,
Okay,
it's
so-
sort of part of it, but I think it's fine we deal with it
All right,
separately, so.
So the revised Board Member Code of Conduct, it is recommended that the Governance and Policy Committee move the proposed amendments to the Board of Trustees for consideration with amendments and track changes.
Yes, and through you, Chair Brown. So the changes are at, Jillian's got it up there already, at 6. We're basically inserting a new section into the Code of Conduct to further, I guess, expand on and provide greater detail around the obligations for social media use. So this is a draft that we've prepared for the committee to discuss and consider, and so I can just walk through it quickly. So we just sort of defined in 6.44 what social media means.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Yes, and then 6.45 just confirmed that any social media account operated by a trustee is subject to the code. General disclaimers like tweets are my own, or do not reflect the board's views, etc., would not shelter the activity from scrutiny and accountability under the Code of Conduct. This is all consistent with how the code has been applied anyway and would be applied, but it just, I hopefully provides greater transparency as well to the public in terms of what our code does require. 6.46 requires the trustees, if they have an account, use their own name as part of any handle. And they don't, attempt to use a different identity or mislead people as to their identity on social media. 6.4, and that's probably the only, I shouldn't say the only, but that's one that I think is, you know, sort of open for debate. Do you want to allow trustees to use a different handle if it's anonymous? But the rest are fairly straightforward. 6.47, as with any other trustees, any other communication, rather, trustees are accountable for the content and confidentiality when using social media. And then 6.48 does provide some greater clarity around the use of social media for campaign purposes. And just confirm that you can't use a board device or account for campaign purposes. So that's essentially, Jillian, if you could just scroll down a little bit to under the next heading, there's one clause that's been added right there, just confirming that, you know, our harassment policy, et cetera, applies to board member conduct, including what occurs on social media. So as I say, I think that's consistent with what the code already does. Social media would not be excluded, but we're just for greater clarity and transparency, particularly for the public, suggesting those changes. But happy to answer any questions you may have. And I think you can go back up, Jillian, to the 6.44.
Are there any questions from trustees? Trustee Edwards.
Thank you. My comment is around the section 6.46, and I'm kind of stealing the student trustees' comments that they have that provided us as well. I have a bit of an issue when we're saying and using social media trustees shall use the real names as part of any handle or social media, because I mean, if I particularly have a company that has basically a website and everything else like that, and it's based on my company name, and I have just a real issue. It really complicates from my perspective. Student trustees actually have made a comment around that basically all trustees have a duty to treat members of the public, one another and staff members respectfully and free from discrimination and harassment. This applies to all forms of written and oral communication, including via social media. I think that, you know, that's a really key thing, but I understand what you're trying to do as far as this is particularly around associating a name with the DDSB, but it doesn't matter, as we heard, it doesn't matter really what the name is or what you're doing. Your position of trustee still exists. And out there, you know, and your role, you should be representing the board, no matter who you are, what event you're going out there, you're still representing the board. So I'm really having a difficulty with that particular one, although I understand sort of where you somewhat were going with. I think it's just that we represent the board, and we should basically treat wherever we are. We should be treating people with respect, and we should include, as far as when it comes to communications, I'm having a real problem with that section.
Yeah, so through you, Chair Brown, if I may, Jillian, could you just scroll down? The language you quoted is already in the code, 6.49. All trustees have a duty to treat members of the public, one another, and staff members respectfully and free from discrimination and harassment. This applies to all forms of written or oral communication, including via social media. Well, we've lost the word media there, so we need an amendment to include the word media. That's weird, but anyway, okay. So that language is there, subject to that correction. And as I say, with 6.46, it was a thought for discussion by the board, and you know, as you point out, it may be practically not workable. I think, you know, I leave it to the committee in terms of what they want to do with 6.46. Obviously, well, obviously it's the committee's decision in terms of whatever they do. But I guess what I'm saying is it's not a hard recommendation on 6.46. It's sort of I put it out there for your consideration.
Trustee Edwards, are you recommending an amendment to the code of conduct?
I'm basically, because yes, as you said, it's not hard to recommend. I would say, you know, as far as the amendments, I would delete section 6.46 and add the word social, basically media, to section, whatever it ends up to be, where it says including via social media, add that word there. Because it's changed numbers, I'm trying to look at 6.48 and then
The old-
6.49, whatever.
Yeah, the old 6.49, we'll just have to, Jillian will have to, so delete 6.46 first before you move on. Let's make sure we get that done for now. We'll have to obviously have a vote on that. Well, can you strike it out, actually? Yeah, in track? So that we know what what trustee Edwards is proposing. Oops. And then we'll just have to make sure that at the end of section 6.49, that was just a typo. It has to be social media, capital S, capital M.
Okay, thank you. May I have a seconder for that motion put forward? Yeah. Okay, so, Trustee Thompson, are you seconding, or do you have something to add?
I'm seconding.
Thank you so much. Okay, do trustees have any additional questions? Okay, Trustee Miller.
Can I just hear it one more time, because I think I might like to amend that motion? Okay. Okay.
It's a removal of point 6.46, it's a whole section.
Just remove the whole section?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think part of it too was to clean up 6.49 there as well, but that's a minor point. I don't think
Just
there's
by
going to be any.
adding media. Was
Yeah.
it media? Okay, Trustee Miller?
Okay, are we able to add additional numbers
Absolutely,
at this point or afterwards?
at this point.
Okay, so I would like to comment then, in line with trustee, thank you, Chair, in line with trustee Edwards, and also the suggestion by trustee Cameron, I do agree that at 6.45, that would have been maybe an initial statement that kind of covers everything. As you did mention, Council Connor, it is already in the code. However, there are some additional things, I think, based on recent experiences that I think we should be clear on. This is just a suggestion, but I do have some additions. I don't think it's not uncommon for organizations to create and adopt policy and guidelines regarding the use of social media. And under two main clauses, that is an acting professional and a member of an organization, they are to respect the policies and any legal obligations for which the organization holds. And the second one is to avoid misrepresentation and the sharing of misinformation. As a trustee, a trustee should avoid using their personal pages to represent or to misrepresent the board, as such actions can undermine the ability to act ethically and in accordance with laws and bylaws and to effectively serve the community. Therefore, I suggest under Appendix B regarding social media that we that we remove 6.47, and I have a suggestion, but I guess we have to vote for that, right? Or can I continue with my suggestion? Okay, so my suggestion then is trustee, it should be clear, my suggestion that it should be clear with statements and leave room for additional statements of clarity. Trustees should be aware and uphold their legal and ethical obligation while using social media and should respect the privacy and confidentiality of members and the community, not make statements that are discriminatory. And a subpoint for section 6.47.
Okay. Just, I think, trustee Moore, if you can just let Jillian catch up a little bit
Oh,
there.
okay, I can repeat, sorry. Okay, so,
Trustee Miller, yeah, please can you repeat for?
Okay, so sorry.
For the minutes.
thank you, Council Cotter. 6.47, my suggestion is trustees should be aware and uphold their legal and ethical obligation while using social media and should respect the privacy and confidentiality of members and community, should not make statements that are discriminatory. So that's 6.47. as a
Was it
suggestion.
was it members and community or members of the community?
Members meaning as trustees or members of the board.
Members, and then you said and the community?
Yes, community that large, yes.
Yeah. okay.
Members and community. And then my second suggestion under 6.4 section as an addition, or could be another one, is trustees should avoid posting any content, including posts or comments that could be misconstrued as complete representative of the school board. And that is all my suggestions at the moment.
So misconstrued as, and what's the word?
I think it's misconstrued representation. Was that what was said, Trustee Miller?
Okay, again, misconstrued as complete representation of the school board. I said representative, but I meant it could be either, what if you want to clarify that. So in other words, not to represent, that the comments or the post are in conclusion of representing the view of the entire school board.
Yeah, okay, so trustees should avoid posting any content, including posts or comment that could be misconstrued as a representation of the board, or as representing the views of the board? Is that as representing the views of the board?
As representative of.
Yeah, representative of views of the board. You can edit it.
So trustees should avoid posting any content, including posts or comments that could be misconstrued as, well, there'd be nothing wrong with posting something that's representative of the views of the board, so it'd have to be misconstrued as that could be construed as misrepresenting. Maybe
Right.
is that
Perhaps,
more?
yeah, that's probably
Could be construed as misrepresenting.
misrepresenting, because they can represent the board.
Yeah,
Correct,
as
correct.
Trustees should avoid posting including that could be construed as misrepresenting the views of the board. Yeah,
Thank you.
I think that works.
Thank you. Am I requesting a seconder for that motion? So it goes on the floor for discussion?
Yes, that makes sense.
Thank you. So I would like to, who would second the amendment to the amendment?
We'll second that.
Thank you, Trustee Thompson. Any questions from trustees? Trustee Pinello.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I'm worried that we are getting away from a couple of things, because I don't disagree with the clarifications that were offered in this amendment, but I feel as it's perhaps a little bit repetitive, because my understanding is that the Code of Conduct already outlines that individual trustees are not supposed to represent or position themselves or posture themselves as representing views of the board. That said, if I can amend the amended amendment, I would just like to build off of that, looking specifically at, sorry, I'm looking at both versions. The 6.47, I realize that was what was amended here. My concern with accountable for content and confidentiality when using social media, there's an interesting intersection where, because we are trustees, we may receive threatening messages that we then share. And so I feel as though confidentiality is a difficult instance in that case, when we are receiving things outside of perhaps the scope of our role as trustees, and or that would not fall within what we may be required to keep confidential. But that's a flag, but for the actual amendment for 6.48, I think it's simple enough to just say, a trustee shall not use DDSB resources for any campaigning, and that falls under the Municipal Act. Like, I understand what the purpose of this section was supposed to do. It's 6.5 for those who are looking at on the screen version, but it was 6.48 before the last amendment. The reason I'm hesitant and feel like we can strike the rest of this out is just because, oh, and I've lost it. Okay. That's okay. The reason why is because during an election period, we are held to the Municipal Election Act anyway. And so, as useful as this is, perhaps, I feel as though at that point, some of it's kind of just moot. Because you wouldn't be allowed to use board resources, and anything that people shared would be subject to the Municipal Elections Act, which I guess in some cases would almost supersede this, because this would only apply if you were elected as a trustee. And you wouldn't hold office during an election, so it wouldn't be applicable. But in the instance that maybe we haven't returned materials before the election, like whatever. I think that 6.5, the amended, just short and sweet, trustees shall not use DDSB resources for any campaigning, might encapsulate that. As for 6.46, I think are accountable for content and upholding the code of conduct for that first sentence would simplify it, because confidentiality is an interesting thing where we are held to different standards of confidentiality with board-issued devices, so FOI requests and integrity commissioner investigations and the such, whereas personal social media accounts and things of that nature are a little bit different. And so I just caution that here, because the interpretation could be very different. But I think the code of conduct outlines clearly how we have to interact and respect and be considerate of ourselves, fellow board members, staff, and the public. Those would just be my thoughts.
If I may, Chair Brown, just a few comments. Thank you, Trustee Kendall, for the comments. I mean, part of the challenge with this section is that it does deal with things that are redundant in a way, but it's to highlight social media use. So I think we do have a section, 6.34 and 6.35, dealing specifically with election and no use of board resources. So to the extent that, you know, that does reference social media sites and websites in 6.35. So some of what's in this new section is redundant, but, you know, I was just trying to be responsive to the request from the trustees to include a separate section on social media. But if we're deleting that section, then I don't think we need the generic statement, because it's here, would be my thought, but I defer obviously to the committee. But I just wanted you to be aware we did have that there.
So I also have another recommendation here as chair, is that I'm wondering whether or not we should table this and come back. It feels like it needs more of a wholesome discussion, this section. As chair, I think I can ask for that. Even though we have a motion on the floor, which
I don't think you do have a
I'm wondering
motion
whether or
on the
not
floor.
we need more discussion around this portion of the code of conduct, and whether or not it's done in this meeting or another.
Yeah, I certainly have no concerns with that. And I guess what we could do, I mean, the committee should probably decide if it's going to go back to the board with just the consolidated bylaws, which probably makes sense, that this discussion on the code not hold that up. But I'll leave that to you, and that may depend on what happens with Trustee Cameron's suggested motion as well.
Okay, so we currently do have a motion on the floor, an amended motion. that still needs to be moved. So, Trustee Pinello moved it, and I'm looking for a seconder for the amended motion. So-
I'm going to just say that a deferral comes ahead of everything else if we look, or a postponement. And so I'm going to make a motion to postpone just this section of amendments, of the various amendments to the amendment of social media, to the next governance meeting. And I'm asking that because there just seems to be so many amendments, and I can't read half that stuff, and considerations. So I'm asking for a postponement of the social media section, which is only that has been added, that social media section. The other stuffs were already there. So the social media is be postponed to the next governance meeting. That's my motion. Thank you.
Can I have a seconder? Trustee Morton. Thank you. All in favor? Okay, so that motion is carried? That motion's carried until the next governance and policy meeting. Thank you.
Chair Brown.
So, Councillor Cotter, for your report.
Chair
is-
Brown.
Is there more to discuss? Sorry.
Just on that piece, given that there's been a lot of kind of discussion, would it make sense, and Patrick, Council Cotter, please shoot me down on this if I'm not, to potentially now consider everything that's been said and maybe come back with some suggestions that we could kind of clean it up to avoid some of that duplication that's there, and a bit more of a review with a fresh set of eyes? Would that make sense? Not trying to take away from
Yeah, I mean, that's
anything that
sort
was
of how
moved.
sorry, thanks, Executive Lead Surgeonic. That's sort of how we have tried to operate at the committee level, just to keep things moving. So I would suggest that I'll do a little bit of a tidy up with what's here and bring it back and retable it for the committee. I think that would be the suggestion.
Thank you. I think I'm done. Okay, so we have one more agenda item. It's an information item, and it's a suggested motion from student trustees in all three. So the DDSB student trustees have shared a suggested motion that proposes amendments to the current student trustee election process contained in the consolidated bylaw. The suggested motions calls for staff to consult with Indigenous students, families and communities, and to come back to this committee with a report on a suggested process for the election of a self-identified Indigenous student trustee. The suggested motions calls for revising the number of regularly elected student trustees from 3 to 2, and the creation of an additional new position for a self-identified Indigenous student trustee to be elected through a still-to-be-determined process. I would like to invite student trustee Ben Cameron to speak to the suggested motion.
Thank you for that introduction, Chair. That was lovely, and I think everything was covered. So this was kind of part B to our first section, or that in the bylaws of electing student trustees. And so we think that the position of Indigenous student trustee is very important because to decolonize our education system. And one of the important parts of decolonizing is representation. So what this motion does is it says, yes, this is important to the board, that there is an Indigenous student on the board representing Indigenous students. It's true that Indigenous students have systemic disadvantages within the education system, but this is not about a certain group of oppressed people or whatever it may be. This is about making sure that the original peoples of our land have a voice in our institutions. I recognize that there's already an Indigenous trustee, Thompson, but this is recognizing that students are the education system's main stakeholder and primary stakeholder. Yeah, this is what this is about. I'd love to answer any questions or concerns.
Thank you, Trustee Cameron. I would just like to suggest that this motion does call for consultation with Indigenous students, families and communities before we determine important questions about exactly what the proposed position of Indigenous student trustees might look like and how that election and how an election for that position might take place. I would caution that we do not make decisions before we have a report back on consultation should the committee decide to proceed with consultation. This would mean that perhaps we move forward with only part of the suggested motion about getting a report back from staff on consultation with the Indigenous community. And once we have that report, we look at potential next steps, if any. Is there a trustee prepared to move the motion? I'm going to ask Ben to repeat the motion as presented. Trustee Cameron, sorry.
That's okay. The motion reads as follows. That the number of regularly elected student trustees referenced in section 2.4.2 of the consolidated bylaws be amended from 3 to 2. That staff, in consultation with Indigenous students, families, and communities, draft an update to the board's consolidated bylaws to establish a process by which a self-identified Indigenous student trustee may be elected to the board, to be presented by way of report to a future meeting of the Governance and Policy Committee. That upon recommendation for approval by the Governance and Policy Committee, the Indigenous Student Trustee election process be presented to the Board of Trustees at the earliest possible board meeting for approval. That an approved DDSB Indigenous Student Trustee election process be in place prior to the election for the 2024-2025 student trustee term.
Can I please have a trustee move that motion? Trustee Thompson?
Can I just make a comment? I don't know, is that allowed to?
Absolutely.
So part of my comment was going to be about consultation, so that's great, that's already covered. The other piece is perhaps some sort of and this could be in the next step process, I'm not sure, but perhaps some kind of a vetting system could be in place through the community. Similarly to how I was appointed, but it doesn't have to be this, an appointment. It just, we need to get confirmation from the community that this person is someone that is appropriately representing the community.
Thank you, Trustee Thompson. Does that mean you will move this motion?
I can move it, yes.
Thank you, Trustee Thompson. Okay, do we have any questions from trustees?
For clarity, Chair Brown, just in terms of what specifically is being moved, whether it's the suggestion that you've made as chair or the entire motion, I think it's important for clarity purposes.
I believe it was the entire motion as we had it on screen. Would you prefer if it was sectioned?
I mean, I think a trustee could move the entire motion and then trustees could
go through and debate that and make amendments and
As a-
add,
as a
remove,
discussion.
change, et cetera.
Yeah.
But I just want to be clear in terms of what trustees will have in front of them and for our minutes purposes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Trustee Linton?
Yeah. Thank you, Trustee Brown. I guess I'm back to, since we're looking at kind of like the consultation and a report back, I'm wondering if we could either add to this, exploring the process of increasing, and I know it's through the Education Act, so I know what I'm about to ask for, exploring the possibility of increasing the number of student trustee representatives from 3 to 4 to be inclusive of. So very similar to what we did with our board, how we went from 11 to 12. So even just the exploration of what it would look like or what it would take for us as a board to move from 3 to potentially 4 student trustees.
Wait, Trustee Linton, are you asking for special permission from the ministry?
Is that what I'm doing?
I'm asking.
I'm asking for us to explore, again, it's still a learning process, yeah?
Yes,
So
for all of us.
I guess I'm asking, are we able to work with staff, maybe, or with Council Carter, to explore what the possibilities of making that amendment?
Okay, so I'm going to put it over to Associate Director Jim Markowski.
Sorry about that. Thank you, and through you, Chair. I wanted to just make a comment. You'll recall we have shared with trustees that back in September of 2021, we moved and launched, and it was approved through our trustees, the Indigenous Education Policy. Within that policy, we make specific comment about engaging with our Indigenous community when decisions are being made, in particular that would impact Indigenous students, Indigenous families, and I do see intersection in the conversation that's taken place. My recommendation to the Board of Trustees would be to simply, at this point, engage in consultation through our Indigenous Advisory Circle and our Indigenous communities, and based on the feedback and input that's received through that consultation to inform next steps. I'm going to leave it at that. I do think there needs to be significant consideration to some of the decision-making, in particular in the absence of our Indigenous community voice.
Trustee Edwards?
And based on some of the comments that Trustee Thompson actually had provided, she was talking specifically about the voice and the process and so forth. Again, and your original comments, Chair Brown, about getting a report, and all these questions that we are asking around, exploring how we would do that. But without the voice, in some ways, we still need the voice of our Indigenous community there. So I have a problem putting this motion forward without the full context and without the consultation of our full Indigenous community, the advisory circle, the students, everybody involved. And we're so thankful that we now have an Indigenous trustee that can help us through that process as well. So the motion is on the table, but again, it's because the motion got put on the table, we, by rights, we're only supposed to be postponing it to the next committee meeting, and I don't think that's going to be a sufficient time to deal with the consultation and so forth. And I don't know whether it's the will of the committee, because I can't postpone it for just the next committee meeting. It's not going to work. But I really think your recommendations that you had your comments, Chair Brown, about getting a full report from staff with the, a full report from staff with the consultation with our advisory committee and our Indigenous community, including students, parents, and so forth, is really crucial. So unfortunately, I'm just going to say I can't vote for this motion, even though there's very much merits to some of what they're saying. I just can't vote for this motion at this point in time, but I would very much like to then put in as far as getting a report from staff. Thank you.
Chair Edwards,
Through you,
would you like to...
through you, Chair Brown, if I might jump in for a minute.
Would you like to amend the motion? Oh. Councillor Cotter?
I just, for my own notes, I don't have a note of it being seconded. Was it seconded? So I know Trustee Edwards said we have a motion on the floor, but I may have missed it, but I don't have a note of it being seconded.
Okay.
Pardon me?
It was moved, but I don't believe it was seconded.
Yeah, so it wasn't seconded yet, so the motion's not on the floor yet until it's seconded.
Sorry,
So I just
Chair.
want to provide some clarity about that. And in terms of the process, just to pick up on Trustee Edwards' point, I do want to provide some guidance to the committee that even if the motion were on the floor, if there was one option to deal with the motion is to refer it to the director or to staff to report back following consultation. So that would be an option, even if it were on the floor, but I don't think it's on the floor yet. It hasn't been seconded. So I think it's still open to if it's not seconded, to move the motion that somebody desires, if it's not this.
Okay, so I'm calling for a seconder for the motion in its entirety. Is that what I'm doing, no?
Yes, it has been moved, so you need to see if that's going to be seconded, and if it's not, then, see if anybody else wants to bring a different motion.
Sorry, Chair, I do not believe that motions need to be seconded in committees, and I believe that Council Cotter would be able to confirm this according to the bylaws. We
are in committee. My fault. No need for it to be seconded. That explains why you said it was on the floor, Donna. We normally do second, but it's not, technically it's not a requirement. That's correct.
I'm going to put you in. Yeah. Okay, so Trustee Pinello.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I would like to amend the motion, and the reasoning being, I think it makes sense, given the conversation, to split the motion so that Part B, that deals with the consultation process, that be the motion that we vote on now, and that perhaps we defer the second portion, all of the other parts, pending that consultation process. And I think that would still allow for appropriate consultation times and the timeline of the 2024-2025 election cycle. But I think it also allows Indigenous communities to have adequate time to add their input and perhaps suggest a process. And then we can take that process and through the board, whether that be us asking the ministry for a special permission to add to our trustees, or whether it refers to the original motion suggestion that takes us from 3 student trustees down to 2, with 1 being the appointed and or elected Indigenous student trustee. At that point, we will have direction from Indigenous communities who have offered their preferences and how that is done. And so I would move that section B, and I'm sorry, I can't see the motion anymore, so I'm going off memory. That section Part B, that staff in consultation with Indigenous students, families, and communities draft an update to the board's consolidated bylaws to establish a process by which a self-identified Indigenous student trustee may be elected to the board, to be presented by way of a report to a future meeting of the Governance and Policy Committee, that be the motion that we vote on, and that the other half of the motion, that includes Part A, C, and D, be deferred pending the outcome of that consultation as outlined. So I would move that motion.
Thank you, Trustee Pinello. I'm assuming I don't need a seconder. Okay, so now that motion's on the floor, is it all in favour? Okay, that's what. Do we have any more questions from trustees? Trustee Cameron?
Thank you, Chair. Just a few comments. I would just like to add that a third of public school boards in the province have an Indigenous student trustee. Includes Hamilton, Wentworth, Toronto, Niagara, York, Near North, Algoma, Rainbow, Lakehead, Limestone, Grand Erie, Thames Valley, Lambton, Kent, and more. And so this motion is all about consultation. That's what the whole motion is. And it was just about our intention to see an Indigenous student representing Indigenous students on the board. So I don't know who is saying that Indigenous students don't want representation on the board. I don't understand what that is, but I'll support the motion as it is.
Trustee
with
Piniella?
the amended motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Student Trustee Cameron. My purpose for splitting the motion was not to challenge whether or not Indigenous communities want a trustee. It's how they would like to go about electing or appointing or selecting, so that when we move a motion implementing the second portion of the motion that includes the timelines for the 2024-2025 election year, we can clearly outline the process and then action any items where we might be asking the ministry for perhaps the addition of said trustee, or we update the bylaw overall. So I think it's in our best interest to do the entire process so that we don't have to revisit this, and we're content with the final product put forward, knowing that community has determined how they want us to proceed, and we present that plan as the overall motion. That was the only purpose. So no challenge to the desire.
Thank you, Student Trustee Cameron and Student Trustee, not trustees, actually Trustee Piniella, you can be a student though. So, all in favour? Oh, sorry,
Chair,
Trustee
could I just-
Morton. I apologise. Trustee Morton?
I have to ask, was that an amendment to the original? Because I could never support bylaws be amended from 3 to 2. I definitely believe in consultation, a collaborative process. I want to advocate to the province that we add a 4th trustee, but I can never support moving from 3 to 2.
Oh, so Trustee Morton, for clarification, it's Part B that's the motion that we're looking at today.
Looking at those 4 paragraphs,
Yeah.
are we only considering the second paragraph?
Absolutely, yes, correct.
Then we need to be very clear on.
You can, oh, okay. Gillian, do you have that minuted, that it's clear that it's only paragraph 2? Thank you. Okay, all in favour? Oh. Trustee Linton, I apologise, I didn't see your hand.
That's okay. I was essentially going to say the exact same thing that Trustee Morton said, so I concur
Thank
with
you.
those statements.
Oh, Student Trustee Cameron?
May we add a timeline? I'm thinking September board meeting.
I love technology.
Oh,
They came back
Oh,
on.
they're back on.
They're back on.
It should be a new motion.
It is. Can you see?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, the motion that's presented on screen, that staff in consultation with Indigenous students, families and communities draft an update to the board consolidated bylaws to establish a process by which a self-identified Indigenous student trustee may be elected to the board to be presented by way of report to a future meeting of the Governance and Policy meeting. We had that moved by Trustee Pinello. So now I need to find out who is all in favour of this motion. Thank you. That motion is carried. I need a motion for an adjournment of the Governance and Policy meeting.
Chair Brown, there's,
Sorry, I was trying to adjourn the meeting and we have one more item with Councillor Cotter.
Thank you. I know that report was riveting. So I'll just reference the report. I did provide a report to the committee because there were some questions about our process for agenda planning. So the report that I prepared is in the package. I'm just trying to pull it up, page 93 through to 96. So I just tried to provide some, I guess, overview of agenda planning, what the Education Act says, what our bylaws say, what good governance sort of calls for, and then sort of the four-step process that we've laid out in terms of matters getting on an agenda. So it's more just for discussion and information, and we can always put it on the agenda again if you know, there's no energy or interest in this topic tonight. But the report is there, and happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, General Counsel Cotter. Are there any questions from trustees? Trustee Morton?
No, I'm not going to ask a question. I just want to state that I am very thankful for this guidance because there was a level of misunderstanding. So thank you, Council Cotter, for providing this.
Thank you.
And I won't take 30 minutes of your time.
That's great. Okay, we're hitting the last part of our agenda, the adjournment. Can I have a mover to adjourn this meeting? Trustee Pinello, Trustee Edwards, and Trustee Morton. Thank you. All in favour? Thank you so much. This meeting is now adjourned.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.